The eviction notice trembled in Elena Morales' hands as she stood in the hallway outside apartment 4C, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. The paper felt heavier than it should, as if the weight of her entire collapsing world had been compressed into a single sheet of legal letterhead. Behind the thin door, she could hear her daughter Mia's labored breathing, the exhausted sleep of a 7-year-old whose body was fighting battles no child should face. The notice gave them 72 hours. 72 hours to vacate the premises for non-payment of rent. 3 months behind, the document stated in cold, bureaucratic language. As if those 3 months hadn't been consumed by hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, experimental treatments, and a desperate scramble to keep Mia alive while everything else fell apart. Elena pressed her forehead against the door frame, fighting the urge to collapse right there in the hallway. Her nurse's scrubs still smelled faintly of disinfectant from her shift at County General, the 12-hour rotation she'd just finished before coming home to find this final indignity taped to their door. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her days caring for other people's sick children while barely managing to save her own. Inside the apartment, Mia stirred. Elena could hear the small movements, the rustling of sheets, and she forced herself upright, folding the notice and shoving it deep into her bag. Not now. She couldn't process this now. First, she needed to check Mia's temperature, make sure her daughter had taken her medications, prepare something resembling dinner from whatever remained in their nearly empty refrigerator. The apartment was small, just one bedroom that Mia occupied while Elena slept on the pull-out sofa in the living room. But it had been theirs for 5 years, since before David left, back when Elena still believed in things like stability and family and futures that extended beyond the next round of treatment. The walls held Mia's artwork, crayon drawings from before the diagnosis when her hands were steady and her imagination wasn't clouded by pain and medication. A timeline of normal childhood gradually giving way to hospital bracelets and get-well cards. "Mama," Mia's voice drifted from the bedroom, weak but alert. "Is that you?" Elena shed her exhausted despair like a coat, replacing it with the bright, capable mask she wore for her daughter. "It's me, Mia Moore. How are you feeling?" She entered the bedroom to find Mia sitting up in bed, her thin frame propped against pillows, her head wrapped in the colorful scarf Elena had bought to replace the hair chemotherapy had stolen. The afternoon light through the window cast her daughter in gold, and for a moment, Elena could almost pretend Mia was just a normal child waking from an afternoon nap. "I'm okay." Mia's standard answer, the brave face she'd learned to wear because she was 7 and resilient and didn't understand that children weren't supposed to be this strong. "Did you bring me anything?" Elena produced a package of animal crackers from her bag, contraband from the hospital cafeteria. "Don't tell your doctor I'm spoiling you." Mia's smile was worth every rule violation, every penny Elena didn't have. As her daughter nibbled carefully on a cracker, nausea from the latest treatment making eating a delicate negotiation, Elena checked the medication schedule taped to the nightstand. 2 more doses today, then the long night ahead when the steroids would keep Mia awake, restless, and uncomfortable. The apartment phone rang, an increasingly rare occurrence since Elena had let her cell service lapse. She answered with caution, bracing for another creditor, another past due notice, another reminder of how completely she'd failed to keep their life from disintegrating. "Ms. Morales? This is Patricia Hendricks from Hendricks and Associates in Millbrook, Connecticut." The woman's voice was professional, slightly formal, with an accent that suggested New England breeding and expensive education. "I'm calling regarding the estate of Dr. Marcus Brennan." Elena's hand tightened on the phone. Marcus Brennan. She hadn't heard that name in years, not since her mother's funeral 6 years ago when Elena had been too overwhelmed with new motherhood and David's increasingly erratic behavior to pay much attention to the elderly man who'd attended, standing at the back of the church with flowers and condolences. "I'm sorry," Elena managed, "but I think you have the wrong person. I knew Dr. Brennan, but only briefly. He was a colleague of my mother's." "Yes, I'm aware." Papers rustled on the other end of the line. "Dr. Brennan passed away 3 months ago at the age of 89. His will specifically names you as beneficiary of his primary research facility and all associated properties. The words didn't make sense. Elena's exhausted brain struggled to process them, turning them over like puzzle pieces that didn't fit together. I don't understand. Why would he leave me anything? I barely knew him. Patricia Hendricks's voice softened slightly. According to his letter of instruction, Dr. Brennan had no living relatives and specifically requested that his research legacy pass to you due to your mother's past contributions to his work. The property in question is a former pharmaceutical research laboratory in Millbrook, Connecticut. It's been vacant for approximately 15 years. Elena sank onto the sofa, her mind reeling. A research laboratory in Connecticut, left to her by a man she'd met exactly once. What would I do with a research laboratory? That's entirely up to you, Ms. Morales. However, the property must be claimed within 90 days or it reverts to the state. I should mention that several parties have expressed interest in purchasing the facility, should you choose to sell. A pause. The offers have been quite substantial. Through the bedroom doorway, Elena could see Mia watching her with curious eyes, picking up on the shift in her mother's energy, even if she couldn't hear the conversation. The eviction notice in Elena's bag felt like it was burning through the fabric. How substantial? The question felt mercenary, but Elena was long past pride. Pride didn't pay for chemotherapy. Pride didn't keep roofs over heads. The most recent offer was for $200,000, contingent on immediate sale and minimal inspection. However, I should inform you that the interested party has a history of, shall we say, aggressive development practices. Dr. Brennan's instructions specifically cautioned against certain buyers. $200,000. The number hung in the air like a lifeline. That would cover me as treatments, rent for years, a fresh start somewhere safe. Elena's practical nurse's mind was already calculating, budgeting, planning. What's the catch? Because there was always a catch. Nothing in Elena's life came without complications. Patricia Hendricks hesitated. The facility has been abandoned for quite some time. According to local reports, it requires significant renovation to meet current building codes. There have also been concerns about the property's condition and history. Nothing substantial, but enough to deter most potential buyers except those willing to demolish and rebuild. Of course, an abandoned building in Connecticut, probably falling apart, possibly contaminated with who knew what chemicals from decades of research. Elena should decline, should take whatever sale offer she could get, and use the money to stabilize their immediate crisis. I like to see it first. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. Before I make any decisions. Of course, I can arrange for you to meet me at the property. When will be convenient? Elena looked around their small apartment, at the eviction notice in her bag, at Mia visible through the bedroom door, so small and fragile against her pillows. What do they have to lose? They were being evicted anyway. A trip to Connecticut, even to see a worthless building, was at least movement, action, something other than drowning in place. This weekend, Elena decided, can you meet me Saturday morning? After Elena ended the call and explained to Mia that they were going on an adventure to see a special building Mama had inherited, her daughter's eyes lit up with the first genuine excitement Elena had seen in weeks. The idea of a trip, of something new and different from the endless rotation of hospitals and treatment rooms, animated Mia in ways medicine couldn't. Elena spent the next 2 days making arrangements with a grim efficiency born of desperation. She called in favors from coworkers to cover her weekend shifts, withdrew the last $47 from their bank account for gas money, and packed their essential belongings into the battered Honda Civic that was somehow still running despite its check engine light having been illuminated for 6 months. The drive from Philadelphia to Millbrook took 4 hours through increasingly rural landscape. Mia dozed in the passenger seat, wrapped in blankets against the November cold that the car's failing heater couldn't quite combat. Elena drove with a strange mixture of dread and desperate hope, watching as strip malls and suburbs gave way to farmland and forest. Millbrook itself appeared around a curve in the road, like something from a previous century. A quintessential New England town with a white church steeple, brick colonial buildings, and a main street that looked preserved for the 1950s. Money lived here, old money, in the carefully maintained historical facades and the luxury cars parked outside the artisanal coffee shop. Elena felt acutely aware of their Honda's rust spots and mismatched panels as she followed GPS directions through the town toward the address Patricia Hendricks had provided. The lawyer had offered to meet them at her office first, but Elena had insisted on going straight to the property. She needed to see what she was dealing with before sitting through legal explanations and paperwork. The GPS directed them off Main Street onto a winding road that climbed into wooded hills. Houses grew farther apart, then disappeared entirely as forest pressed close on both sides. Just when Elena was beginning to think they'd made a wrong turn, the road opened into a clearing, and there it was. The research facility sat on what must have been 10 acres of overgrown grounds, a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings that looked like they'd been designed in the 1960s. Lots of glass and concrete, modernist architecture now weathered by decades of neglect. The main structure was 3 stories tall with wings extending on either side. Smaller outbuildings dotted the property, including what looked like a greenhouse with most of its glass panels shattered. "Whoa," Mia breathed, pressing her face against the car window. "It's huge, Mama. It's like a science castle." Elena pulled into the circular drive in front of the main entrance, her practical mind already cataloging problems. Broken windows, overgrown vegetation pushing through cracks in the parking lot, visible water damage on several sections of the building. The place looked like it had been abandoned mid-operation, as if everyone had simply walked away one day and never returned. A sleek black Mercedes sedan was already parked near the entrance. Patricia Hendricks emerged as Elena and Mia climbed out of their Honda, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair in a perfect bob, wearing a camel wool coat that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. Her professional smile faltered slightly when she saw Mia's thin frame and headscarf, a moment of visible compassion breaking through her lawyer's composure. "Ms. Morales, thank you for making the drive." Her handshake was firm, her gaze kind as it shifted to Mia. "And you must be Mia. Dr. Brennan left something special for you inside." Mia perked up at this, finding energy Elena knew she didn't really have. "For me? Really?" Patricia produced a ring of old-fashioned keys from her briefcase. Dr. Brennan was very specific in his instructions. He wanted to make sure that if Ms. Morales accepted the inheritance, young Mia would have something to remember him by. The lawyer led them to the main entrance, a set of glass doors that had somehow remained intact despite the building's general deterioration. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and the door swung open to reveal a lobby that took Elena's breath away. Unlike the exterior, the interior was pristine. The floor was polished terrazzo in shades of blue and gray. The walls featured mid-century modern artwork, abstract paintings in wooden frames. A reception desk curved elegantly along one wall, and a sweeping staircase led to the upper floors. Afternoon light streamed through skylights, creating patterns on the floor that Mia immediately began following like a game. "I don't understand," Elena said slowly. "The outside looks abandoned, but this is..." "Maintained," Patricia finished. Dr. Brennan employed a caretaker until his death, someone who kept the interior climate-controlled and secure. The exterior was deliberately allowed to deteriorate to discourage interest from certain parties. They moved deeper into the building, Mia's hand warm in Elena's as her daughter's curiosity overcame her usual treatment-induced fatigue. The main corridor was lined with laboratories, each visible through large windows. The equipment looked dated but expensive: microscopes, centrifuges, analysis machines Elena recognized from her hospital work. Everything covered in dust, but intact. Patricia consulted a folder as they walked. This was Brennan Pharmaceutical Research, one of the leading private drug development facilities in the country from 1975 to 2008. Dr. Brennan focused primarily on oncology research, cancer treatments. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Cancer research. Her mother had worked in oncology nursing. The connection was suddenly less random, more deliberate. They climbed to the second floor, where Patricia led them to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the wooded property. The nameplate on the door still read, Dr. Marcus Brennan, Director. Inside, the office was frozen in time. Bookshelves lined with medical journals, a desk with a leather chair, photographs on the walls showing Dr. Brennan at various stages of his career. One photograph in particular caught Elena's attention. It showed a much younger Dr. Brennan standing beside a woman in nurse's scrubs. Elena recognized her immediately. Her mother, Maria Morales, probably 40 years ago based on the hairstyle and clothing. They were both smiling, standing in front of what looked like this very building. "Your mother worked here," Patricia said quietly. "From 1982 to 1987. Dr. Brennan's letter explains that she was instrumental in several critical research breakthroughs, though she never received formal recognition because she wasn't a credentialed researcher. When she left to pursue her nursing degree full-time, he always regretted not being able to continue their collaboration." Mia had wandered to a corner of the office where a child-sized table held a collection of scientific toys, models of molecules, a small microscope, books about chemistry and biology designed for young readers. A note card sat on the table in spidery handwriting. "For Mia, future scientist. May curiosity lead you to discovery." He knew about me? Mia touched the microscope gently, her eyes wide. Patricia nodded. "Dr. Brennan followed your mother's life through mutual colleagues. When he learned of your diagnosis, he began making arrangements. This inheritance isn't random, Mia. He wanted to help." Elena's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't afford to feel. She forced herself to focus on practicalities. "You said there were substantial offers to purchase the property. What would happen to all this equipment, the research materials?" "Most buyers plan to demolish the facility and redevelop the land. The equipment would be sold for scrap, and any remaining research materials destroyed." Patricia's expression suggested her own disapproval of these plans. "Dr. Brennan specifically requested that you consider preserving his work, but he understood that might not be financially viable given your circumstances. $200,000. Enough to save them. All Elena had to do was sign papers and walk away, let someone tear down this building and pave over whatever legacy it represented." But something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the photograph of her mother, so young and vital. Maybe it was Mia's wonder at the scientific toys, the first time in months her daughter had shown interest in anything beyond managing her pain and fear. Maybe it was simple exhaustion making her reckless. "Can we see more?" Elena asked. Before I decide, Patricia checked her watch but nodded. "The facility is quite extensive. The basement level is particularly, well, you should see it yourself." They descended via a service stairwell, Mia counting steps to distract herself from the effort of climbing down. The basement corridor was narrower than the upper floors, more utilitarian, with concrete walls and fluorescent lights that flickered to life as Patricia flipped switches. Doors lined both sides, each labeled with codes that meant nothing to Elena. "Storage facilities, mostly," Patricia explained. "Old research samples, archived materials, equipment no longer in use." She paused at a door at the end of the corridor, different from the others, heavier, with an electronic keypad beside the handle. This area was Dr. Brennan's private archive. According to his instructions, only you would have access. She handed Elena a small card with a 6-digit code. Elena entered the numbers and heard heavy locks disengage. The door swung inward to reveal a climate-controlled room roughly 20 feet square. Metal shelving lined 3 walls, filled with labeled boxes and filing cabinets. But it was the center of the room that drew Elena's attention. A large safe sat there, industrial grade, the kind used for storing valuable documents or materials. Unlike everything else in the facility, this safe looked modern, recently installed. A post-it note was stuck to its door, written in the same spidery handwriting as Mia's gift note. "When you're ready." "I don't know the combination to that," Patricia admitted. "Dr. Brennan's instructions only say that the code will be obvious to you when the time is right." He could be cryptic about such things. Elena studied the safe, her mind spinning with questions. What was inside? Research data? Something valuable? or just an eccentric old man's idea of a puzzle. Mia tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, I'm tired. Can we sit down?" Reality reasserted itself. Her daughter needed rest, needed her medications that were back in the car, needed stability that Elena couldn't provide by standing in a basement staring at a mysterious safe. "Let's go back upstairs," Elena decided. "I need time to think about all of this." They returned to Dr. Brennan's office where Mia settled into the leather chair, her small body dwarfed by its size. Patricia laid out the essential information with practiced efficiency. Elena had 90 days to decide whether to keep the property or sell. If she kept it, she would inherit all equipment, research, materials, and a small endowment Dr. Brennan had set aside for property maintenance, enough to cover taxes and utilities for approximately 2 years. If she sold, the most serious offer came from Millbrook Development Corporation, a company run by a man named Richard Thorne who had been trying to acquire the property for years. Patricia's tone when she mentioned Thorne carried a warning. Mr. Thorne has a reputation for aggressive business practices and little regard for historical preservation or environmental concerns. Dr. Brennan specifically noted in his will that he hoped you would reject Thorne's offers. But of course, the decision is entirely yours. As if summoned by the mention of his name, the sound of a powerful engine interrupted their conversation. Through the office windows, Elena watched as a silver Jaguar pulled into the circular drive, parking arrogantly close to her beaten Honda. The man who emerged was probably 60, with the kind of preserved appearance that came from expensive personal trainers and regular spa treatments. His suit was perfectly tailored, his silver hair artfully styled. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Patricia's expression darkened. "That's Richard Thorne. I didn't inform him of your visit. He must have been watching the property." Thorne approached the main entrance with proprietorial ease, as if he already owned the place. Within moments, his knock echoed through the building, impatient, demanding. Patricia moved to intercept him, but Elena stopped her. "I'll talk to him. Might as well understand what we're dealing with." She met Thorne in the lobby, Mia trailing behind despite Elena's gesture to stay in the office. The developer's smile was practiced, his handshake firm to the point of aggressive. "Ms. Morales, I presume." "Richard Thorne, Millbrook Development. I wanted to introduce myself and discuss a proposal that would benefit both of us." His eyes cataloged her worn clothing, her exhausted appearance, then shifted to Mia with a flash of calculation. "I understand you're inheriting Dr. Brennan's white elephant here. Quite a burden for someone in your circumstances." The implication was clear and insulting. Elena felt her spine straighten. "I haven't made any decisions yet about what to do with the property." Of course. But let me save you considerable time and stress." Thorne gestured around the lobby with dismissive ownership. "This facility is essentially worthless as a functioning research center. The equipment is obsolete, the building doesn't meet modern codes, and the property taxes alone would bankrupt most individuals. However, the land value is substantial." He withdrew a document from his briefcase. "I'm prepared to offer you $300,000 for immediate sale, with no inspection contingencies. You could sign today and have funds in your account by Monday." $300,000, an extra $100,000 over his previous offer, spoken so casually, as if the money meant nothing to him. Elena thought of Mia's medical bills, the experimental treatment her insurance wouldn't cover, the eviction notice back in Philadelphia. "That's very generous," she managed. Thorne's smile widened. "I believe in making offers people can't refuse, especially when they're facing difficulty." His gaze flicked to Mia again, lingering on her headscarf in a way that made Elena's skin crawl. A sick child, medical expenses, no stable housing. Why burden yourself with this headache when you could walk away wealthy enough to focus on what really matters? Patricia had joined them in the lobby, her professional demeanor barely masking anger at Thorne's presumptuous appearance. "Mr. Thorne, this is highly irregular. Ms. Morales is entitled to time to consider all her options." "I'm simply being helpful," Thorne countered smoothly, "preventing the kind of unfortunate financial decisions that desperate people often make." He turned back to Elena. "I've seen this pattern before. People inherit properties they can't maintain, hold on to them for sentimental reasons, and end up losing everything when reality catches up with their fantasy. I'm offering you a practical solution. Something about his certainty, his assumption that Elena would crumble under pressure, triggered a stubborn resistance she hadn't known she still possessed. Her life had been nothing but people telling her what she couldn't do, couldn't handle, couldn't manage. David had said it when he left. The social worker had implied it when reviewing Mia's case. Even well-meaning doctors sometimes spoke as if Elena's opinion about her daughter's treatment was less valid than their expertise. "I appreciate the offer," Elena said, her voice steady. "But I'm going to need more than a few hours to make this decision." Thorne's smile thinned. "Time costs money, Ms. Morales. The longer you wait, the more value the property loses. Winter is coming. Do you know what frozen pipes and snow damage can do to a building like this? Every week you delay is thousands of dollars in depreciation. Then I guess I'd better make a decision quickly." Elena extended her hand to end the conversation. "Thank you for coming out to introduce yourself, Mr. Thorne." The developer recognized dismissal when he encountered it. His handshake was colder this time, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I'll give you 1 week to reconsider. After that, my offer decreases significantly. I hope you'll be smart about this, for your daughter's sake, if not your own." He left with the same arrogant confidence he'd arrived with, his Jaguar's engine roaring to life as he accelerated down the drive with unnecessary speed. Mia watched the car disappear, then looked up at Elena with worried eyes. "He was me, Mama. He wanted to scare you." Patricia knelt beside Mia, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine concern. "Your mother doesn't scare easily, sweetie. She's tougher than Mr. Thorne realizes." But as they locked up the facility and prepared to drive back to Philadelphia, Elena wondered if Patricia's confidence was misplaced. She was terrified of making the wrong choice, of letting pride or sentiment override practical need, of risking her daughter's future for a building full of someone else's memories. The drive home was quiet, Mia sleeping fitfully in the passenger seat while Elena's mind churned through impossible calculations. $300,000 could change their lives, could give Mia every treatment she needed, could secure their housing, could rebuild the stability that had shattered when David left. But something nagged at her. Why had Dr. Brennan been so specific about keeping the facility intact? What was in that safe? And why had Thorne been so aggressive, so eager to acquire a property he claimed was essentially worthless except for its land? They arrived back at their apartment building near midnight to find a new notice taped to their door, bright orange this time, warning that failure to vacate by Monday would result in legal action and forfeiture of their security deposit. Elena stood in the dim hallway holding the notice while Mia dozed against her side, the weight of decision pressing down like physical force. Inside the apartment, after settling Mia into bed and administering her nighttime medications, Elena found herself pulling out the folder Patricia had given her. Dr. Brennan's letter was there, written in the same shaky handwriting as the notes he'd left. The letter explained more than Patricia had conveyed. Dr. Brennan had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 5 years ago, the same disease that had eventually killed him. During his treatment, he'd followed medical research, staying current with developments in oncology. He'd learned about a promising new drug called Celeritin, 9 being tested in clinical trials for pediatric leukemia. Elena's blood ran cold. Celeritin 9. She knew that drug. It was the experimental treatment Mia's oncologist had mentioned, the one insurance wouldn't cover because it was still in phase 3 trials. The one that was showing remarkable results in children like Mia, whose cancer hadn't responded to standard chemotherapy. The treatment cost $40,000 per month. Dr. Brennan's letter continued. The irony is not lost on me that I spent 40 years researching cancer treatments, yet my own work never progressed to save lives like your daughter's. Celeritin 9 represents exactly the kind of breakthrough I hope to achieve. I leave you this facility not as a burden, but as an opportunity. Within my research archive, you will find materials that may prove valuable, not just historically, but actively. Trust your instincts, Elena. Your mother did. She understood that the most important discoveries often hide in places others overlook. Elena read the letter 3 times, trying to decode its meaning. Materials that may prove valuable? What did that mean? Research data? Something related to Celeritin 9? Or just an old man's hopeful final message to someone he'd chosen as his heir? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Morales, this is Richard Thorne. I want to apologize for my directness earlier. I realize you need time to grieve and consider your options. I'm increasing my offer to $400,000 for sale within the next 48 hours. This will allow you to focus on your daughter's needs without the distraction of property management. Please consider carefully. RT, for $100,000. Now he was adding another $100,000, all while claiming he was being generous and understanding. Elena's instincts screamed warning. Why was he so desperate? What was he really after? She opened her laptop, the old machine taking forever to boot up. A quick internet search revealed that Richard Thorne was exactly what Patricia had suggested, a developer known for aggressive land acquisition, usually for luxury housing developments or commercial properties. His company had a history of legal disputes with environmental groups and former property owners who claimed they'd been pressured into selling. More interesting was what Elena found about the property itself. Local news articles from 15 years ago covered the closure of Brennan Pharmaceutical Research. The articles were oddly vague about why such a successful facility had shut down. One mentioned regulatory compliance issues and voluntary suspension of operations pending investigation, but there was no follow-up reporting about what the investigation concluded. Elena dug deeper, following threads through academic databases she had access to through her hospital affiliation. Dr. Brennan had published extensively in oncology research journals through the 1990s. His work focused on targeted therapies for difficult-to-treat cancers. Then, abruptly in 2007, his publication stopped. No retirement announcement, no final paper summarizing his career, just silence. She was about to give up when she found a reference buried in a pharmaceutical industry newsletter from 2008. A brief paragraph noted that Brennan Pharmaceutical Research had been part of a consortium developing a new class of cancer medications based on novel protein-binding mechanisms. The consortium had dissolved following intellectual property disputes and questions about clinical trial protocols. Intellectual property disputes. Elena's tired mind struggled to connect dots. Dr. Brennan had been developing cancer treatments. His facility had closed amid some kind of controversy about research ownership. Now, years later, a new cancer drug called Celeritin 9 was showing remarkable success in trials, the exact kind of drug Dr. Brennan had been working on. Could there be a connection? Was that what was in the safe? Research data that had been buried during the intellectual property dispute? Elena closed her laptop, head throbbing with exhaustion and information overload. She was a nurse, not a lawyer or scientist. She had no business trying to unravel complex pharmaceutical research mysteries. She should take Thorne's money, focus on Mia, and let someone else worry about Dr. Brennan's legacy. But she couldn't stop thinking about that safe. About the note that said, "When you're ready." About Dr. Brennan's letter suggesting there were valuable discoveries hiding in overlooked places. The next morning, Saturday, Elena called Patricia Hendricks at the emergency number she'd provided. "I need to go back to the facility. Today, if possible." Patricia sounded surprised, but not displeased. "Of course. I can meet you there this afternoon. May I ask what's prompted this urgency?" "I need to open that safe." The drive back to Connecticut was harder this time. Mia's morning had been rough. Complications from the latest chemotherapy round, leaving her nauseous and weak. Elena's co-worker Rosa had agreed to stay with Mia. But leaving her daughter while chasing what might be a wild fantasy made Elena question her own judgment. Still, she drove. Patricia met her at the facility at 2 o'clock, unlocking the main entrance and escorting Elena directly to the basement archive room. The safe sat exactly as they'd left it, imposing and mysterious. "Any insights about the code?" Patricia asked. Elena had been thinking about nothing else during the drive. "When you're ready," the note had said. Not "when you have the code," or "when you figured out." "When you're ready." As if the code should be obvious, something she already knew. She thought about Dr. Brennan's letter, about her mother's work at the facility, about the connection between them. Then it hit her, so obvious she almost laughed. She knelt in front of the safe and entered 6 digits. 032817. March 28, 2017. The date her mother had died. The safe's locks disengaged with a solid click. Patricia inhaled sharply behind her as Elena pulled the heavy door open. Inside was remarkably organized. The top shelf held documentation, folders of research notes, clinical trial data, correspondence with pharmaceutical companies. The middle shelf contained what looked like laboratory samples and protective cases, vials of compounds carefully labeled and preserved. The bottom shelf held a metal briefcase secured with a combination lock. Elena reached for the folders first, spreading them on the floor to examine. The documents detailed research into a class of drugs called selective apoptosis inducers, medications that targeted cancer cells' ability to evade programmed cell death. The work was incredibly detailed, spanning years of experiments, failed attempts, breakthrough discoveries. One folder was labeled Protocol 505M. Inside, Elena found clinical trial designs, preliminary results from animal studies, and initial human safety data. The drug being tested was listed as Compound BR 505, a targeted therapy for acute lymphoblastic leukemia in pediatric patients. Her hand shook as she read. This was exactly the type of cancer Mia had. And the preliminary results were extraordinary. Remission rates far exceeding standard chemotherapy, with significantly reduced side effects. But the folder ended abruptly in 2007. A final memo from Dr. Brennan noted that the research consortium had been dissolved due to irreconcilable differences regarding intellectual property rights and commercial development strategy. The pharmaceutical company partners had claimed ownership of all research data and terminated Dr. Brennan's involvement. Oh my God, Elena breathed. Patricia was reading over her shoulder. What am I looking at? I think Dr. Brennan developed the precursor to serotonin. I think his research was the foundation, but he was cut out before it went to market. Elena shuffled through more documents, finding correspondence that grew increasingly bitter. Lawyers' letters, cease and desist orders, demands that Dr. Brennan surrender all research materials. The final letter in the folder was from Dr. Brennan himself, dated 2008, addressed to the Pharmaceutical Consortium's legal team. You may have the legal rights to commercialize our work, but you don't have all the data. I preserve the complete research archive, including protocols and compounds you deemed commercially non-viable in your rush to market. History will judge which of us prioritize profit over patients. Elena moved to the metal briefcase on the bottom shelf. Unlike the safe 6-digit code, this lock was a simple 3-number combination. She tried random sequences, her mother's birthday, Dr. Brennan's birthday, various significant dates from the research timeline. Nothing worked. Then she noticed a small notation on the briefcase's handle, so faded it was barely visible. Mia's future. Elena's breath caught. She entered 505 and heard the locks pop open. Inside the briefcase, nestled in protective foam, were dozens of vials containing what appeared to be refined pharmaceutical compounds. Each was meticulously labeled with chemical formulas, dosage information, and stability data. But one set of vials stood out, stored in a specially marked container. BR 505, Advanced Protocol, Batch 8C, stable until 2030. A note card lay on top of the container. Dr. Brennan's handwriting shaky, but legible. Elena, if you're reading this, you've found what I preserved when they tried to bury my life's work. Protocol 505, and was never completed because it couldn't be quickly commercialized. The pharmaceutical companies wanted faster results, cheaper production, broader market appeal. They took my initial research and rushed Celeratin 9 to market, a good drug, but not the best I could have created. This is the original compound, refined to my exacting standards. It represents 40 years of research they tried to erase. I leave it to you not for profit, but for purpose. Your mother would have known what to do with it. I trust you will as well. Elena sat back on her heels, her mind reeling. She was holding vials of an experimental cancer treatment, one that had never been officially tested because it wasn't commercially convenient. Vials that might or might not be more effective than the drug that had been rushed to market. Vials that represented the culmination of Dr. Brennan's career and his final act of defiance against an industry that had discarded him. And Mia, her 7-year-old daughter dying because insurance wouldn't cover the $40,000 a month treatment that had been derived from this very research, was home in Philadelphia right now, getting sicker. "This is insane," Elena whispered. Patricia had gone pale. "Ms. Morales, what exactly are we looking at?" "I think we're looking at the reason Richard Thorne wants this property so badly." Elena carefully photographed several pages of documentation with her phone. "And I think we're looking at the answer to why a pharmaceutical company might want every trace of Dr. Brennan's original research destroyed." She stood, decision crystallizing with unexpected clarity. "I'm not selling. Whatever happens, I'm not giving this facility to Thorne or anyone else who wants to bury this work." Patricia looked torn between professional concern and personal approval. "Ms. Morales, I have to advise you that this decision comes with significant risks. If these compounds represent what you think they do, and if powerful interests wanted them suppressed, you could face serious opposition. I'm already facing eviction and my daughter's death." Elena's voice was steady despite her pounding heart. What's a little pharmaceutical industry opposition compared to that? The enormity of what she discovered hit Elena during the drive back to Philadelphia. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel as she navigated the darkening highway. The metal briefcase secured in her trunk alongside photocopies of Dr. Brennan's research documentation. She'd left the original vials in the climate-controlled safe. Patricia had insisted, citing security concerns and the need for proper chain of custody if Elena intended to do anything legitimate with the compounds. But Elena had taken photographs of everything. The chemical formulas, the clinical trial protocols, the bitter correspondence between Dr. Brennan and the pharmaceutical consortium that had tried to erase his work. Evidence of a drug that might be more effective than Celeritin. 9. Sitting and used in a basement safe while children like Mia died because insurance wouldn't cover the inferior version that had made it to market. Her phone rang through the car's Bluetooth, Rosa's number flashing on the dashboard screen. Elena answered with dread tightening her chest. "How is she?" "She's okay, Elena. Sleeping now." Rosa's warm voice carried reassurance. "But she asked for you 3 times. And there was a man here earlier, said he was from the landlord's office, wanted to verify you were vacating by Monday. I told him you were out of town on family business." The eviction. Elena had been so consumed by the discovery at the research facility that she'd temporarily forgotten the immediate crisis waiting at home. Did he leave any additional paperwork? Just reinforced that Monday is final. Said if you're not out, they'll have the sheriff remove your belongings to storage, and you'll be liable for costs. A pause. "Elena, where are you going to go?" The question Elena had been avoiding. She had no family in Philadelphia, no close friends with extra room. David's family had cut ties when he left. Rosa would help if she could, but she had 4 children in a 2-bedroom apartment already. Shelters were possible, but with Mia's compromised immune system, the risk of infection was too high. "I'm figuring it out," Elena lied. "I'll be home in about an hour. Thank you for staying with her." After ending the call, Elena's mind worked through impossible logistics. The research facility in Connecticut had plenty of space, dozens of rooms, climate control, functioning utilities. Dr. Brennan's endowment covered taxes and basic operations. Could they actually live there? Move into an abandoned research laboratory, 2 hours from Mia's doctors and treatment center? The idea was absurd. Except it wasn't, not really. Not when measured against sleeping in a Honda or exposing Mia to shelter conditions. The facility had everything they needed: shelter, electricity, running water, even furniture in some of the offices. It would be temporary, just until Elena could figure out what to do with Dr. Brennan's research. Maybe until she could sell the property for enough money to start fresh somewhere stable. By the time Elena reached their apartment building, she made a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. They would move to Connecticut, not permanently, just as a temporary solution while Elena navigated the complex situation she'd inherited. She would keep Mia's treatment schedule at Philadelphia's Children's Hospital until they could arrange transfers to a facility closer to Millbrook. It would be difficult, involve long drives for appointments, but possible. Rosa looked exhausted when Elena arrived home, her expression conveying both sympathy and unspoken concern about Elena's judgment. She's been asking about the science castle. Said you promised she could explore it more. Guilt twisted in Elena's stomach. She'd been so focused on the mystery of the safe and Thorne's aggressive offers that she hadn't properly considered how this was affecting Mia. Her daughter was 7, sick and scared. Dragging her from place to place while chasing what might be fantasy solutions wasn't mothering. It was desperation masquerading as hope. But when Elena entered the bedroom, Mia's eyes opened with unexpected alertness. "Mama, did you find treasure in the science castle?" Elena sat carefully on the edge of the bed, smoothing Mia's headscarf. "I found something important. Medicine research that might help people. Like the medicine that might help me?" Mia's directness, the way she confronted her own mortality without flinching, simultaneously broke Elena's heart and reminded her why she was fighting so hard. "Maybe. I don't know yet." Elena chose honesty over false hope. "But Dr. Brennan, the man who owned the building, he wanted us to have it because he thought we might understand how important his work was." Mia considered this with 7-year-old seriousness. "Because I'm sick like the people his medicine could help?" "Yes, baby. Exactly that. Then we should keep it. Simple certainty. The kind only children possess. We can't let the mean man buy it and destroy the medicine." Out of the mouths of babes, Elena hugged her daughter gently, careful not to press against the port in her chest where chemotherapy drugs were delivered. "You're right, which is why I need to tell you something. We're going to move to Connecticut for a little while. To the science castle." Mia pulled back, eyes wide. "Really? We can live there. Temporarily, until I figure out what to do with the building and Dr. Brennan's research." Elena watched her daughter's face carefully, looking for fear or resistance. "It won't be like a normal house. It's a big building with laboratories and offices. But there's furniture and heat and lots of space for you to explore when you're feeling well enough." "Will I still get my medicine?" "See Dr. Patterson?" "Yes. We'll drive back here for your appointments. It's about 2 hours, so we'll have to plan carefully, but we can do it." Elena said this with more confidence than she felt. "And if you hate it, if you're scared or uncomfortable, we'll figure out something else. I promise." The next 36 hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Elena gave notice at County General. Her supervisor understood, had seen too many nurses pushed to breaking points by personal crises. She packed their essential belongings with ruthless efficiency. Clothes, Mia's medications, critical documents, a few cherished possessions. Everything else, furniture, kitchen items, accumulated debris of their previous life, would be left for the landlord to dispose of. Rosa helped, her practical nature cutting through Elena's emotional paralysis about what to keep and what to abandon. "You're not leaving forever," she reminded Elena as they sorted through Mia's toys. "You're making a strategic retreat to regroup. That's different." Sunday evening, Elena loaded the Honda with everything they were taking. The car sat low on its suspension, trunk and back seat crammed with garbage bags of clothing, boxes of medical supplies, and Mia's beloved stuffed animals. They looked like refugees, which Elena supposed they were. Rosa stood on the curb as Elena buckled Mia into the passenger seat, pressing an envelope into Elena's hands. "It's not much, just $300. For gas, for emergencies, for whatever you need." Elena tried to refuse, but Rosa wouldn't hear it. "You do the same for me. You have done the same for me. Remember? When Carlos lost his job and we couldn't make rent." Her eyes were wet with tears she wouldn't let fall. "You take care of that baby. And you call me if you need anything. Anything at all." They left Philadelphia at dusk, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror as Elena navigated toward the highway. Mia dozed fitfully beside her, wrapped in blankets against the November cold that the car's failing heater couldn't quite combat. Elena drove through the darkness with her mind churning through everything she didn't know and couldn't control. She didn't know if Dr. Brennan's research compounds were actually viable or just an old man's fantasy of vindication. She didn't know if Richard Thorne would escalate his pressure when he learned she wasn't selling. She didn't know how to arrange Mia's ongoing treatment from Connecticut, how to establish care with new doctors, how to maintain the medication schedules that kept her daughter alive. But she knew they had a place to sleep tonight. And sometimes, in the midst of complete uncertainty, that one certainty had to be enough. They arrived at the research facility near midnight. Elena used the keys Patricia had provided, unlocking the main entrance and disarming the security system with the code the lawyer had written down. The lobby's motion sensor lights flickered to life, illuminating the mid-century modern space that now represented their temporary home. Mia woke as Elena carried her inside, her small arms circling her mother's neck. "We're really going to live here. For now." Elena's voice echoed in the empty building, emphasizing just how alone they were. 200 miles from anyone who knew them, in a facility full of secrets and ghosts and pharmaceutical research that might or might not represent salvation. She'd identified a promising space during her previous visit, a suite of offices on the second floor that had apparently served as Dr. Brennan's personal quarters during late-night research sessions. The rooms included a small kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower, and 2 areas that could serve as bedrooms. Furniture remained, a sofa that could convert to a bed, a desk, chairs, even some basic kitchen equipment. Elena spent the next hour making the space habitable. She found linens in a supply closet, surprisingly fresh thanks to the caretaker's maintenance, and made up the sofa bed for Mia. The building's heating system was functional, gradually raising the temperature to something approaching comfortable. Water ran clear from the taps after the initial rust-colored surge from pipes that hadn't been used regularly in years. By 1 in the morning, Mia was settled in makeshift bed, her medications administered on schedule, her stuffed animals arranged around her like guardians. Elena sat in the kitchenette with instant coffee heated in a microwave that must have been old when Clinton was president, staring at the research documents she'd photocopied. Protocol 505. Compound BR 505. Years of meticulous research into a targeted therapy that had been buried because it wasn't commercially convenient. Dr. Brennan's notes suggested the compound was more effective than what had eventually become Celeritin 9, with fewer side effects and better long-term outcomes. But it required more complex production processes, longer treatment protocols, and couldn't be easily mass-marketed. So they'd simplified it, rushed a modified version through trials and approval while burying the original research that showed their shortcuts had compromised efficacy. All perfectly legal, according to the intellectual property agreements Dr. Brennan had been forced to sign. The pharmaceutical consortium owned the rights to commercialize any derivatives of his work. They just didn't own his conscience or his complete research archive. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message, an unknown number, but she recognized the tone immediately. "Ms. Morales, Richard Thorne again. I hope you've reconsidered my generous offer. I understand you're facing housing challenges in Philadelphia. Let me help solve your problems. Call me tomorrow, and we can finalize a sale that will give you and your daughter the fresh start you deserve. Time is running out. RT." The message's timing was too coincidental. How did Thorne know about her eviction? Had he been monitoring her situation? The thought sent chills down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the November temperature. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and began researching Celeritin 9's development history more thoroughly. The drug had been approved by the FDA 3 years ago after accelerated trials based on its breakthrough therapy designation for pediatric leukemia. The pharmaceutical company behind it, Meridian Therapeutics, had stock that soared on the approval news. Annual revenues from Celeritin 9 now exceeded $500 million. Further digging revealed something interesting. Richard Thorne sat on Meridian Therapeutics' board of directors. He'd been appointed in 2009, shortly after Dr. Brennan's facility had closed and the intellectual property disputes had been resolved in Meridian's favor. "Yes, we'll drive back here for your appointments. It's about 2 hours, so we'll have to plan carefully, but we can do it." Elena said this with more confidence than she felt. "And if you hate it, if you're scared or uncomfortable, we'll figure out something else. I promise." The next 36 hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Elena gave notice at County General. Her supervisor understood, had seen too many nurses pushed to breaking points by personal crises. She packed their essential belongings with ruthless efficiency. Clothes, Mia's medications, critical documents, a few cherished possessions. Everything else, furniture, kitchen items, accumulated debris of their previous life, would be left for the landlord to dispose of. Rosa helped, her practical nature cutting through Elena's emotional paralysis about what to keep and what to abandon. "You're not leaving forever," she reminded Elena as they sorted through Mia's toys. "You're making a strategic retreat to regroup. That's different." Sunday evening, Elena loaded the Honda with everything they were taking. The car sat low on its suspension, trunk and back seat crammed with garbage bags of clothing, boxes of medical supplies, and Mia's beloved stuffed animals. They looked like refugees, which Elena supposed they were. Rosa stood on the curb as Elena buckled Mia into the passenger seat, pressing an envelope into Elena's hands. "It's not much, just $300. For gas, for emergencies, for whatever you need." Elena tried to refuse, but Rosa wouldn't hear it. "You do the same for me. You have done the same for me. Remember? When Carlos lost his job, and we couldn't make rent." Her eyes were wet with tears she wouldn't let fall. "You take care of that baby. And you call me if you need anything. Anything at all." They left Philadelphia at dusk, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror as Elena navigated toward the highway. Mia dozed fitfully beside her, wrapped in blankets against the November cold that the car's failing heater couldn't quite combat. Elena drove through the darkness with her mind churning through everything she didn't know and couldn't control. She didn't know if Dr. Brennan's research compounds were actually viable or just an old man's fantasy of vindication. She didn't know if Richard Thorne would escalate his pressure when he learned she wasn't selling. She didn't know how to arrange Mia's ongoing treatment from Connecticut, how to establish care with new doctors, how to maintain the medication schedules that kept her daughter alive. But she knew they had a place to sleep tonight. And sometimes, in the midst of complete uncertainty, that one certainty had to be enough. They arrived at the research facility near midnight. Elena used the keys Patricia had provided, unlocking the main entrance and disarming the security system with the code the lawyer had written down. The lobby's motion sensor lights flickered to life, illuminating the mid-century modern space that now represented their temporary home. Mia woke as Elena carried her inside, her small arms circling her mother's neck. "We're really going to live here. For now." Elena's voice echoed in the empty building, emphasizing just how alone they were. 200 miles from anyone who knew them, in a facility full of secrets and ghosts and pharmaceutical research that might or might not represent salvation. She'd identified a promising space during her previous visit, a suite of offices on the second floor that had apparently served as Dr. Brennan's personal quarters during late-night research sessions. The rooms included a small kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower, and 2 areas that could serve as bedrooms. Furniture remained, a sofa that could convert to a bed, a desk, chairs, even some basic kitchen equipment. Elena spent the next hour making the space habitable. She found linens in a supply closet, surprisingly fresh thanks to the caretaker's maintenance, and made up the sofa bed for Mia. The building's heating system was functional, gradually raising the temperature to something approaching comfortable. Water ran clear from the taps after the initial rust-colored surge from pipes that hadn't been used regularly in years. By 1 in the morning, Mia was settled in makeshift bed, her medications administered on schedule, her stuffed animals arranged around her like guardians. Elena sat in the kitchenette with instant coffee heated in a microwave that must have been old when Clinton was president, staring at the research documents she'd photocopied. Protocol 505. Compound BR 505. Years of meticulous research into a targeted therapy that had been buried because it wasn't commercially convenient. Dr. Brennan's notes suggested the compound was more effective than what had eventually become Celeritin 9, with fewer side effects and better long-term outcomes. But it required more complex production processes, longer treatment protocols, and couldn't be easily mass-marketed. So they'd simplified it, rushed a modified version through trials and approval while burying the original research that showed their shortcuts had compromised efficacy. All perfectly legal, according to the intellectual property agreements Dr. Brennan had been forced to sign. The pharmaceutical consortium owned the rights to commercialize any derivatives of his work. They just didn't own his conscience or his complete research archive. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message, an unknown number, but she recognized the tone immediately. Ms. Morales, Richard Thorne again. I hope you've reconsidered my generous offer. I understand you're facing housing challenges in Philadelphia. Let me help solve your problems. Call me tomorrow, and we can finalize a sale that will give you and your daughter the fresh start you deserve. Time is running out. RT. The message's timing was too coincidental. How did Thorne know about her eviction? Had he been monitoring her situation? The thought sent chills down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the November temperature. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and began researching Celeritin-9's development history more thoroughly. The drug had been approved by the FDA 3 years ago after accelerated trials based on its breakthrough therapy designation for pediatric leukemia. The pharmaceutical company behind it, Meridian Therapeutics, had stock that soared on the approval news. Annual revenues from Celeritin-9 now exceeded $500 million. Further digging revealed something interesting. Richard Thorne sat on Meridian Therapeutics' board of directors. He'd been appointed in 2009, shortly after Dr. Brennan's facility had closed and the intellectual property disputes had been resolved in Meridian's favor. The connections formed a web Elena didn't fully understand, but could sense the shape of. Thorne wasn't just a developer interested in prime real estate. He had a direct financial stake in ensuring Dr. Brennan's original research remained buried. If anyone proved that Celeritin-9 was a deliberately inferior version of what could have been developed, that Meridian had prioritized profit over patient outcomes, the legal and financial consequences could be catastrophic. No wonder Thorne was willing to pay $400,000 for a worthless property. Elena finally went to bed near 3 in the morning, lying beside Mia in the makeshift bedroom, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the research facility settling around them. She'd expected to feel afraid. Two vulnerable people alone in an isolated building with powerful interests arrayed against them. Instead, she felt something unexpected: determination. For the first time in months, Elena wasn't just reacting to crisis. She was making active choices, claiming agency in a situation that had previously felt like drowning in forces beyond her control. Maybe it was reckless. Maybe she'd endangered Mia further by rejecting Thorne's money and moving to Connecticut on a wild hope that Dr. Brennan's research meant something. But maybe, just maybe, she'd found a one thing that could actually save her daughter. Morning arrived with pale November sunlight streaming through the office windows. Elena woke to find Mia already up, sitting at the desk with her coloring books spread before her, working carefully on a picture of a rainbow. The normalcy of the scene, her daughter doing something ordinary and childlike, made Elena's chest ache with gratitude. "Morning, Mia Moore. How do you feel?" "Okay." Mia's standard answer, but her color looked better this morning. The medications from the latest treatment cycle were starting to balance out. "Can we explore more of the science castle today?" Elena checked the medication schedule. Nothing time-critical until evening doses. "After breakfast. But we take it slow, okay? You tell me if you get tired." They ate cereal with shelf-stable milk in the kitchenette, then ventured into the facility's corridors with flashlights and curiosity. The building revealed itself gradually. Laboratories with equipment that looked like something from a science fiction film. Storage rooms filled with preserved specimens and research materials. A small library containing medical journals dating back decades. Mia was fascinated by everything, asking endless questions Elena couldn't always answer. What were those machines? Why did that room have such a big freezer? What were all the bottles on those shelves? Her daughter's curiosity, dormant for so long under the weight of illness, was reawakening in this strange new environment. In one laboratory, Elena found a whiteboard still covered with chemical formulas in Dr. Brennan's handwriting. The equations meant nothing to her nursing knowledge, but seeing them there, preserved like a message from the past, made the researcher feel suddenly present, as if he might walk through the door at any moment. They were exploring the third floor when Elena's phone rang. Patricia Hendricks's number flashing on the screen. Ms. Morales, I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. Are you still in Philadelphia? Actually, I'm at the facility. Mia and I moved in yesterday. A pause laden with concern. You're living at the research facility? Ms. Morales, I'm not sure that's advisable given that we were being evicted and had nowhere else to go. Elena cut through the diplomatic objection. Dr. Brennan's endowment covers utilities. The building is weatherproof and secure. It's temporary, but it solves an immediate problem. Patricia sighed. I understand your circumstances are difficult. However, I need to inform you that Richard Thorne has filed a legal challenge to Dr. Brennan's will. He's claiming undue influence and mental incompetence, arguing that a man dying of cancer couldn't have been of sound mind when changing his estate plans to leave everything to someone he barely knew. Elena's grip tightened on her phone. Can he do that? He can try. Whether he'll succeed is another question. Papers rustled in the background. Dr. Brennan anticipated this possibility and had extensive documentation of his mental competence prepared. However, the challenge means the estate enters probate litigation, which could take months to resolve. During that time, your status as inheritor is legally ambiguous. Meaning what exactly? Meaning Thorne's attorneys will argue you have no legal right to occupy the property or make any decisions about its use. They'll likely seek an injunction to prevent you from accessing the facility or its contents. Patricia's voice softened. I'm sorry, Ms. Morales. I know this complicates an already difficult situation. After ending the call, Elena sank onto a desk chair in the nearest office, Mia climbing into her lap with concerned eyes. Is the mean man trying to take our castle? He's trying. Elena hugged her daughter close, thinking furiously. Thorne was escalating, using legal mechanisms to force her out when direct offers hadn't worked. But he'd made a mistake. By filing the legal challenge, he'd created a public record of his interest in the property. And public records could be researched, connections traced, motivations questioned. Elena spent the afternoon on her laptop, diving deeper into Thorne's business history and his relationship with Meridian Therapeutics. The more she uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Thorne had been instrumental in Meridian's acquisition of Dr. Brennan's research. He'd brokered the deal that dissolved the research consortium and transferred intellectual property rights to Meridian. He profited enormously when Meridian went public shortly after Celeritin 9's approval. And now he wanted to ensure that the one person who still had access to Dr. Brennan's complete research archive, the archive that could prove Meridian had deliberately chosen profit over better patient outcomes, didn't have time to understand what she possessed. Elena made 2 phone calls that afternoon. The first was to a medical malpractice attorney Rosa had once mentioned, her cousin who specialized in pharmaceutical litigation. Elena left a voicemail explaining that she had potential evidence of drug development misconduct and needed consultation. The second call was to Mia's oncologist, Dr. Patterson, at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. Elena explained her situation, the move to Connecticut, the need to continue Mia's treatment protocol, the experimental drug Celeritin 9 that insurance wouldn't cover. Dr. Patterson's response was careful. Elena, I understand your desperation, but Celeritin 9 is still in phase 3 trials. Even if we could get Mia enrolled, there's no guarantee she'd receive the actual drug versus placebo, and the trial sites are limited. I don't think there are any in Connecticut accepting new pediatric patients. What if there was another option? Elena kept her voice steady. A compound similar to Celeritin 9, but potentially more effective. Original research that was never completed. Silence on the other end. Then, Elena, where is this coming from? Are you talking about experimental drugs that haven't been tested? I'm talking about research that was suppressed for commercial reasons. Dr. Brennan's work that predated Celeritin 9. Elena chose her words carefully. I have access to his complete research archive, including compounds he preserved. I need someone with oncology expertise to evaluate whether the research is legitimate. Dr. Patterson's tone shifted from concern to professional interest. You're saying you have access to unpublished cancer research? From a legitimate pharmaceutical researcher, Dr. Marcus Brennan. He ran Brennan Pharmaceutical Research from 1975 to 2008. His work was the foundation for what became Celeritinine. I know who Brennan was. His early papers on selective apoptosis inducers were groundbreaking. Background noise suggested Dr. Patterson was already searching for information on her computer. There were rumors about why his facility closed, intellectual property fights with larger pharmaceutical companies. Nothing concrete, just academic gossip. It wasn't gossip. I have documentation proving Meridian Therapeutics forced him out and buried his most promising research because it couldn't be quickly commercialized. Elena's words tumbled out faster now. Dr. Brennan left me his entire research archive, including preserved compounds of the original drug he developed. I need someone to evaluate whether it's viable, whether it could actually help children like Mia. Another long silence. When Dr. Patterson spoke again, her voice carried both caution and curiosity. What you're describing could be extraordinary if true. It could also be completely worthless, preserved compounds degrading over time, research that looked promising in theory but failed in practice. Without proper evaluation by qualified researchers, there's no way to know. Then help me find qualified researchers. Elena heard the plea in her own voice. I'm not asking you to experiment on Mia. I'm asking you to help me determine if this research deserves a second look. I need to see the documentation first. Everything you have, research protocols, compound specifications, stability data. Dr. Patterson was typing now, the clicks audible through the phone. Can you scan and send it? I could do better than that. I can show you the facility and the actual archive. They arranged for Dr. Patterson to visit the following weekend. It wasn't ideal. Mia had an appointment at Children's Hospital that Friday anyway for routine labs and examination. They could drive down for the appointment. Then Dr. Patterson could follow them back to Connecticut to evaluate Dr. Brennan's research. After securing that commitment, Elena felt a fragile hope taking root. She had an expert willing to assess the research. She had legal representation pursuing the pharmaceutical litigation angle. And she had physical possession of both the facility and its contents, at least until Thorne's legal challenge forced the issue. The rest of the week settled into an unexpected routine. Elena and Mia explored the facility methodically, cataloging its contents and making the space more livable. They discovered a surprising amount of furniture and equipment that made their temporary residence more comfortable. A microwave that actually belonged to this century in a break room, blankets and pillows in a storage closet, even a small television in what had been a staff lounge. Mia's health remained stable, the reprieve between treatment cycles allowing her energy to return. She turned their exploration into games, pretending they were scientists discovering lost laboratories, archaeologists uncovering ancient mysteries. Her imagination transformed the sterile research facility into an adventure. Elena used Mia's naptime hours to continue researching. She found academic papers Dr. Brennan had published, tracing the evolution of his thinking about targeted cancer therapies. She reviewed patent filings, noting where Meridian's patents for Celeritin 9 diverged from Brennan's original research approach. She built a timeline of events: when the consortium dissolved, when intellectual property was transferred, when Brennan's facility closed, when Celeritin 9 entered trials. The pattern was clear. Meridian had taken Dr. Brennan's foundational work, simplified it for faster commercialization, and buried the original research that showed their shortcuts had compromised efficacy. It was legal. They owned the intellectual property rights. But was it ethical? And more importantly, could it be challenged if someone had evidence of what had been lost? Wednesday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Elena was in the basement archive room, photographing more of Dr. Brennan's documentation, when a security system's alert chimed, motion detected at the main entrance. She quickly locked the archive room and hurried upstairs, finding Mia safe in their makeshift living quarters, watching a movie on the old television. Through the lobby windows, Elena saw a sheriff's deputy emerging from a county vehicle. Her heart sank. This was it, Thorne's legal challenge manifesting in official action. But when the deputy handed her the envelope, it wasn't an eviction notice or injunction. It was a citation for building code violations. The document listed numerous infractions: unapproved residential, occupancy of a commercial property, lack of proper residential permits, failure to meet current safety codes for habitable structures. You've got 14 days to remedy the violations or vacate the premises, the deputy explained, not unkindly. Building inspector will return in 2 weeks to verify compliance. After he left, Elena studied the citation with growing anger. The violations were technically accurate. The facility wasn't zoned or permitted for residential use. But the timing was too convenient. Thorne couldn't evict her through the will challenge fast enough. So he'd gone through back channels, using building codes to accomplish the same goal. She called Patricia immediately. The lawyer's response confirmed Elena's suspicions. Richard Thorne sits on the Millbrook Town Council. He has significant influence over local building and zoning enforcement. This is exactly the kind of pressure tactic I warned you about. Can we fight it legally? The violations are real, even if the motivation for enforcing them is questionable. We could argue selective enforcement, but that takes time and money. Patricia's frustration was evident. Ms. Morales, I have to ask, is staying at this facility worth fighting a war on multiple fronts against someone with Thorne's resources? Elena looked at the research documents spread across Dr. Brennan's desk, at the archive room containing compounds that might save children's lives, at Mia curled up on the sofa watching her movie with innocent contentment. It's worth it if the research is real. If there's even a chance that what Dr. Brennan preserved could make a difference. That night, after Mia was asleep, Elena descended to the archive room and opened the safe again. She carefully photographed each vial of compound BR505M, documenting their labels and storage conditions. Then she did something that would have terrified her a week ago. She removed one vial from its protective container and placed it in a specialized medical transport box she'd found among the laboratory supplies. If Dr. Patterson was going to properly evaluate the compound's viability, she needed an actual sample, not just documentation. Elena had no idea if removing the vial violated some legal protocol or if she was destroying evidence by disturbing the archive's pristine preservation. But she'd reached a point where caution seemed less important than action. Friday's drive to Philadelphia for Mia's appointment felt different than their previous journey. Instead of fleeing in desperate uncertainty, Elena was traveling with purpose. She had a plan, fragile and probably foolish, but a plan nonetheless. Dr. Patterson met them at Children's Hospital with professional efficiency, conducting Mia's examination with a thorough attention that had made Elena trust her in the first place. The news was neutral. Mia's lab showed stable disease, neither improving nor worsening. The current chemotherapy protocol was holding the cancer in check, but not eliminating it. Without more aggressive treatment, the prognosis remained guarded. The Celera-9 trial is still your best option, Dr. Patterson reminded Elena as Mia got dressed after the examination. I've been working contacts, and there might be an opening at a trial site in Boston. It would require relocating, but what if the original compound is better? Elena interrupted. What if Dr. Brennan's research was right, and the drug that made it to market is a compromised version? Dr. Patterson's expression was carefully neutral. That's what I'm coming to Connecticut to evaluate. But Elena, even if Brennan's research was brilliant, even if his compounds are stable and viable, we're talking about untested drugs. The ethical and legal hurdles to actually using them are enormous. I know. Elena did know. She wasn't naive enough to think she could just start giving Mia experimental drugs from a basement safe. But she also knew that insurance companies and pharmaceutical corporations and regulatory systems moved slowly while her daughter's cancer didn't. I'm not asking you to prescribe something untested. I'm asking you to help me understand if there's a path forward. Dr. Patterson followed them back to Connecticut in her own car, arriving at the research facility as afternoon faded to evening. Her reaction to the building was immediate fascination. This was a researcher's space, filled with equipment and resources that spoke to her scientific training. Elena led her directly to the archive room, presenting Dr. Brennan's documentation with the nervous pride of a student showing work to a respected teacher. Dr. Patterson examined everything with methodical attention. Research protocols, clinical trial designs, compound specifications, stability data for the preserved drugs. Hours passed as the oncologist absorbed information, making notes, occasionally asking questions Elena couldn't answer. Mia eventually fell asleep on the sofa in Dr. Brennan's office, exhausted from the long day. And still Dr. Patterson read, analyzed, and evaluated. Finally, near midnight, she looked up from the documents with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. This is extraordinary work. Brennan was decades ahead of his time in understanding how to target cancer cell death mechanisms. But is it real? Could the compounds actually work? Dr. Patterson chose her words carefully. The research is legitimate and sophisticated. The theoretical framework is sound. The preliminary data from animal studies and early safety trials is impressive. She paused. But there's a massive gap between impressive preliminary data and safe, effective treatment. Brennan never completed full clinical trials for Protocol 505M. We don't know how these compounds would perform in actual patients because they were never given the chance. Why? Elena knew the answer, but needed to hear it confirmed by someone with scientific authority. Because pharmaceutical companies prioritize what can be brought to market quickly and profitably. Brennan's approach required more complex manufacturing, longer treatment courses, more individualized dosing. It couldn't be mass-produced as easily as what became Celeritin 9. Dr. Patterson tapped the documentation. So they took his foundational research, simplified it, and created a drug that was good enough to get approved, but not as good as what Brennan envisioned. Can you prove that? Can you show that Celeritin 9 is inferior to what it could have been? Dr. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. That's a dangerous question, Elena. Proving pharmaceutical companies deliberately chose profit over patient outcomes would require resources, expertise, and legal protection I don't have. It would make powerful enemies. You already have the resources. Elena gestured around the archive room. Everything you need to make the comparison is right here. Brennan documented everything. His complete research, the modifications Meridian made, the shortcuts they took. And you have the expertise to evaluate it. But I don't have the legal protection. Dr. Patterson met Elena's eyes directly. I'm a practicing oncologist at a major hospital that receives research funding from pharmaceutical companies. If I start publicly questioning Meridian's drug development practices, I could lose my position, my funding, my ability to help children like Mia. The honesty was brutal, but appreciated. Elena slumped against the archive shelving, exhausted by hope that kept running into practical reality. So the research just sits here, useless, while children die because insurance won't cover a drug that shouldn't have been necessary if pharmaceutical companies had finished developing the better version? I didn't say it was useless. Dr. Patterson stood, pacing the small archive room with visible agitation. I said it was dangerous. There's a difference. She turned back to Elena. What you have here is evidence, not just of Brennan's brilliance, but of a pattern in pharmaceutical development that prioritizes marketability over maximum efficacy. That evidence could be powerful in the right hands. Whose hands? Investigative journalists, academic researchers outside the pharmaceutical industry's influence, patient advocacy groups, lawyers specializing in pharmaceutical litigation. Dr. Patterson ticked off possibilities on her fingers. People who can't be silenced or bought off as easily as someone like me. Elena thought of the attorney she contacted, Rose's cousin who specialized in pharmaceutical litigation. She'd left a voicemail days ago, but hadn't heard back. I tried reaching a pharmaceutical litigation lawyer. No response yet. Try harder. Find someone with a track record of taking on major pharmaceutical companies. Dr. Patterson pulled out her phone, typing quickly. I know a few names. Attorneys who've won cases against drug companies for suppressing research or hiding adverse effects. They work on contingency, taking a percentage of any settlement rather than charging upfront fees. She sent Elena a list of names and contact information. Reach out to all of them. Explain what you have. Someone will be interested, and once you have legal representation, I can provide expert consultation without jeopardizing my position. As Dr. Patterson prepared to leave, she paused at the door of the archive room. Elena, you should know, the compound samples you have, the preserved vials of BR-505, their stability data suggests they're still viable for another several years. If someone wanted to complete Brennan's clinical trials, if funding and approval could be secured, those compounds could form the basis for new research. Is that possible? Could someone actually pick up where Brennan left off? In theory, yes. In practice, Dr. Patterson's expression was grim. You need institutional support, FDA approval for investigational new drug status, funding for clinical trials, and protection from pharmaceutical companies who would fight to prevent competition with their existing products. It would take years and millions of dollars. But Mia doesn't have years. The words hung between them, the brutal reality that had driven every decision Elena made. Dr. Patterson's eyes were wet with tears she didn't let fall. I know, and I'm so sorry. That's why we need to get her into the Celeritin 9 trial in Boston. It's not perfect, but it's the best option we have right now. After Dr. Patterson left, Elena sat alone in the archive room, surrounded by Dr. Brennan's life work. Research that could save lives if only the systems existed to translate it from theoretical promise to actual treatment. But those systems didn't exist, not for people like her and Mia. They existed for pharmaceutical companies that could profit from streamlined development processes, for researchers at elite institutions, for patients with the resources to access cutting-edge trials. Elena's phone buzzed with an email notification. The pharmaceutical litigation attorney, finally responding to her voicemail from days ago. The message was brief. Ms. Morales, your voicemail mentioned evidence of pharmaceutical development misconduct related to cancer drugs. Very interested in discussing. Can you meet Monday at my office in Hartford? James Chun and Associates. Hartford was 45 minutes from Millbrook. Monday was 3 days away. Elena composed a response confirming the meeting, then added, should I bring the research documentation or just summaries? Chen's reply came within minutes. Bring everything you have. If it's as significant as you suggest, we'll need to review primary sources. Looking forward to meeting you. Elena closed her laptop and sat in the silence of the archive room, feeling the weight of decisions made and decisions still ahead. She'd rejected Richard Thorne's money, moved her sick daughter into an abandoned research facility, and was now preparing to share potentially explosive evidence with an attorney who might or might not be trustworthy. By any reasonable standard, she was making terrible choices driven by desperation rather than logic. But desperation, Elena was learning, had its own logic. When all the reasonable paths led to the same terrible outcome, unreasonable paths started looking rational by comparison. If playing it safe meant watching Mia die, while insurance companies debated coverage and pharmaceutical companies protected profits, then maybe safety was overrated. Elena locked the archive room and climbed the stairs to their makeshift living quarters. Mia slept peacefully, her breathing steady, her small face relaxed in a way it rarely was during waking hours when pain and nausea were constant companions. In sleep, she looked like any normal 7-year-old, full of potential and future. That future, that's what Elena was fighting for. Not just the immediate goal of keeping Mia alive through the next treatment cycle, but the larger possibility of a world where children like her daughter could access the best possible treatments instead of whatever pharmaceutical companies found most profitable to develop. Dr. Brennan had spent 40 years pursuing that possibility before he'd been shut down. Now, somehow, his unfinished work had landed in Elena's unqualified hands. She didn't have his expertise or resources. She didn't have institutional support or legal protection. She had a sick daughter, an abandoned research facility, and evidence that powerful people wanted to keep buried. It should have been terrifying, and it was. But it was also, in a strange way, clarifying. For the first time since Mia's diagnosis, Elena knew exactly what she was fighting for and against. The enemy had a face: Richard Thorne, Meridian Therapeutics, a pharmaceutical development system that valued profit over patients. And the weapon, however imperfect, was sitting in a climate-controlled safe in the basement. Now, she just had to figure out how to use it. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth. November sunlight streaming through the research facility's tall windows as Elena prepared for her meeting with James Chun. She'd spent the weekend organizing Dr. Brennan's documentation into coherent folders: research protocols, correspondence with Meridian Therapeutics, evidence of the intellectual property dispute, stability data for the preserved compounds. Mia sat at the desk in Dr. Brennan's office, carefully coloring a picture she'd drawn of the science castle, as she insisted on calling their temporary home. Her energy was good this morning, the stability between treatment cycles offering precious windows of normalcy. "Rosa's going to come stay with you while I'm at my meeting," Elena explained, checking her daughter's medication schedule one more time. Her friend had driven up from Philadelphia the night before, insisting that Elena shouldn't navigate this alone. "Can I show her my laboratory?" Mia had claimed one of the smaller research rooms as her own, filling it with her coloring books and stuffed animals, arranging equipment she didn't understand into patterns that pleased her 7-year-old aesthetic. "Of course. Just stay on the second floor, okay? No exploring the basement without me." Rosa appeared in the doorway, carrying coffee in travel mugs and a bag of pastries from the Millbrook Bakery. "Reinforcements have arrived. You ready for this?" Elena wasn't sure. Ready implied preparation, confidence, some sense of control. She felt none of those things. But she was committed, which would have to be enough. The drive to Hartford took 45 minutes through Connecticut back roads that were beautiful in their autumn display: gold and crimson leaves, white church steeples, stone walls marking old property boundaries. Elena tried to appreciate the scenery, to calm her racing thoughts, but her mind kept circling back to what she was about to do. Sharing Dr. Brennan's research with an attorney made it real, made it public in a way it hadn't been when the evidence sat locked in a basement safe. Once other people knew what she had, there would be no taking it back, no quietly accepting Thorne's money and walking away. She would be committed to whatever fight came next. James Chin's office occupied the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone in Hartford's legal district. The reception area was modest but professional: comfortable chairs, law books lining shelves, framed degrees and case victories on the walls. Chun himself emerged within minutes of Elena's arrival, a man in his early 40s with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. "Ms. Morales, thank you for coming." He gestured toward his private office. "Your voicemail mentioned evidence of pharmaceutical development misconduct related to cancer treatments. I have to tell you, I get a lot of calls like that. Most turn out to be grievances rather than actual cases. But something about your message suggested this might be different." Elena placed the folders on his desk. Dr. Marcus Brennan spent 40 years developing targeted cancer therapies. In 2007, he was forced out of his own research facility by pharmaceutical companies that claimed ownership of his work through intellectual property agreements. They took his foundational research, simplified it for faster commercialization, and brought a drug called Celeritin, 9 to market while burying his original, more effective compounds. Chin opened the first folder, his expression shifting from polite interest to focused attention as he scanned the documents. "You have the original research protocols?" "Everything. Research data, correspondence showing the intellectual property dispute, documentation of how Meridian Therapeutics modified his work, and preserved samples of the original compounds." Elena pulled out the photographs she'd taken of the vials. "The compounds are still viable. They've been properly stored in climate-controlled conditions." For the next 2 hours, Chin examined the documentation with meticulous attention. He asked questions Elena couldn't always answer: technical details about pharmaceutical patents, specifics of FDA approval processes, regulatory frameworks she barely understood. But what she could provide was the timeline, the correspondence, the evidence of Dr. Brennan's work being deliberately suppressed. Finally, Chin sat back in his chair, his expression grave. "This is extraordinary, Ms. Morales. If what you're showing me is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt it given the documentation. This could be one of the most significant pharmaceutical misconduct cases I've encountered. Relief and fear warred in Elena's chest. You believe the research is legitimate? I'm not a scientist, so I can't evaluate the technical merit of Dr. Brennan's compounds. But I can evaluate evidence of corporate misconduct, and what you have here is damning. He tapped a particular letter, Meridian's legal team, demanding Dr. Brennan surrender all research materials. They knew his work was superior to what they were developing. They acquired it specifically to prevent competition. Can we do anything about it? Or is it too late because they legally own the intellectual property? Chen considered this carefully. Owning intellectual property doesn't give companies unlimited latitude to suppress research that could benefit patients. If we can prove Meridian deliberately chose a less effective formulation for commercial reasons, if we can show they knew Dr. Brennan's original compounds were superior but buried them anyway, we have grounds for legal action. What kind of action? Multiple angles. We could pursue fraud claims if Meridian misrepresented their drugs' efficacy relative to what was possible. We could argue antitrust violations if they acquired Brennan's research specifically to eliminate superior competition. We could bring wrongful death claims on behalf of patients who died or suffered because they received an inferior treatment when a better option existed. Chen's energy was building, the lawyer in him seeing a case taking shape. But I have to be honest with you. This would be a massive undertaking against opponents with virtually unlimited resources. Meridian Therapeutics has a market capitalization of $18 billion. They employ armies of lawyers. They have relationships with regulatory agencies and academic institutions. Fighting them would be brutal. Elena thought of Mia sleeping peacefully back at the facility, of Dr. Patterson's careful assessment that Celeritin 9 was good enough but not as good as what could have been developed. My daughter has the kind of cancer Dr. Brennan's research was designed to treat. She can't get access to Celeritin 9 because insurance won't cover experimental therapies that cost $40,000 a month. But the only reason Celeritin 9 is experimental is because Meridian rushed a compromised version to market instead of finishing development of the superior compound. Chen's expression softened with understanding. This is personal for you. It's personal for thousands of families. How many children have died or suffered unnecessarily because Meridian prioritized profit over proper drug development? Elena's voice cracked despite her effort to remain composed. Dr. Brennan left me his research because he knew I'd understand what was at stake. Not just intellectually, but personally. He wanted someone who would fight for it instead of selling out. Speaking of selling out, you mentioned in your voicemail that someone's been pressuring you to sell the facility. Richard Thorne. He's offered up to $400,000 for immediate sale. He's also filed a legal challenge to Dr. Brennan's will, cited me for building code violations to force me out of the facility, and seems to be monitoring my personal situation closely enough to know about my eviction in Philadelphia. Elena pulled out her phone, showing Chun the text messages from Thorne. He sits on Meridian's board of directors. He brokered the original deal that transferred Dr. Brennan's intellectual property to Meridian. Chen's jaw tightened as he read the messages. This is witness intimidation at minimum, possibly extortion, depending on how explicitly he's connected the sale offer to making your legal problems disappear. He made notes rapidly. The building code violations, were they legitimate? Technically, yes. The facility isn't zoned for residential use. But the timing was too convenient, and Thorne has influence over Millbrook's building department through his position on the town council. Selective enforcement to harass a witness. We can fight that. Chin was typing now, drafting what looked like a preliminary complaint. Ms. Morales, if you're willing to move forward with this, here's what I recommend. First, we secure the research facility and its contents legally. I'll file an emergency motion to prevent any action against the property until Dr. Brennan's will is properly probated. Second, we bring in expert witnesses to evaluate the scientific merit of his research and the validity of your claims about Meridian's conduct. Third, we build a coalition, other attorneys, patient advocacy groups, investigative journalists, to put public pressure on Meridian while we pursue legal remedies. How long would all that take? Chen's honesty was brutal. Years, probably. These cases are marathons, not sprints. Meridian will fight every step, use every delay tactic, try to bury us in procedural motions and discovery demands. He paused. But they'll also be terrified, which gives us leverage. If this goes public, if media starts asking why Meridian buried superior research, their stock price will take a hit. That creates incentive for settlement. I don't want settlement money. Elena surprised herself with the vehemence of her response. I want Dr. Brennan's research completed. I want the better drug developed properly and made available to patients who need it. That's not something I can deliver through litigation. Chen's expression conveyed both respect and regret. Legal action might force Meridian to license the research to other companies or release their intellectual property claims, but actually developing a new drug and bringing it to market that requires institutional pharmaceutical infrastructure we can't compel through lawsuits. The impossibility of what Elena wanted settled over her like a weight. She didn't just need to win a legal battle. She needed to fundamentally change how pharmaceutical development worked, needed to create a path for Dr. Brennan's research to reach patients when all the systems and incentives were aligned against exactly that outcome. Chun seemed to read her despair. But here's what legal action can do. It can create pressure and attention. If we make enough noise, if we build a compelling enough case, other institutions might get involved. Academic research centers, nonprofit pharmaceutical developers, government agencies. There are people in this field who care about getting the best treatments to patients, who aren't purely motivated by profit. Legal action creates space for them to act. Elena made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. I want to move forward. File whatever motions you need to file. Bring in whatever experts are necessary. I'll pay however I can. She stopped, realizing she had no money to pay attorney fees. I work on contingency for cases like this, Chen interrupted. If we win or settle, I take a percentage. If we lose, you owe nothing. All I need from you is commitment to see this through, cooperation with discovery and testimony, and exclusive access to Dr. Brennan's research materials as evidence. They shook hands, sealing an agreement that would change Elena's life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As she drove back to Millbrook, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. 860 area code, Connecticut. Ms. Morales? This is Sarah Mitchell. The woman's voice was warm, but carried an undertone of urgency. Dr. Patterson gave me your number. I'm a journalist investigating pharmaceutical industry practices, particularly around cancer drug development. She mentioned you might have information relevant to a story I've been researching about Meridian Therapeutics and Celerity 9. Elena's pulse quickened. Dr. Patterson had been true to her word about connecting Elena with people who could help. What kind of story? I've been investigating why certain promising cancer treatments never make it to patients despite strong preliminary research. Meridian keeps appearing in those stories. They have a pattern of acquiring research from smaller facilities, modifying it for faster commercialization, then suppressing the original work. Papers rustled in the background. Dr. Patterson suggested you might have documentation of this pattern related to Dr. Marcus Brennan's research. I have more than documentation. I have the actual research facility, the complete archive of his work, and preserved samples of compounds that were never brought to market. Elena pulled into a rest area, unable to focus on driving while navigating this conversation. How much do you know about what happened to Dr. Brennan? For the next 30 minutes, Elena and Sarah Mitchell compared notes. The journalist had been investigating Meridian for over a year, following threads from patient advocacy groups who questioned why certain promising treatments disappeared from development pipelines. She'd found patterns, smaller research facilities being acquired or shut down, researchers being forced out, intellectual property being transferred to larger companies that then shelved the research. But she'd lacked concrete evidence, specific documentation proving the pattern was deliberate rather than coincidental. Until now. What you have could break this story open, Sarah said, excitement building in her voice. But I have to warn you, publishing anything about Meridian's practices will make you a target. They have extensive legal resources, and they're not afraid to use them against journalists and whistleblowers. I'm already a target. Richard Thorne is trying to force me to sell the facility. He's challenged Dr. Brennan's will, and he's using building code enforcement to harass me. Elena's exhaustion was evident even to herself. At this point, going public might actually be safer than trying to hide. At least if the story is out there, they can't make me disappear quietly. Sarah was silent for a moment. That's remarkably brave or remarkably reckless. I'm not sure which. Probably both. Elena laughed without humor. But my daughter is dying because insurance won't cover a drug that only exists because pharmaceutical companies buried better research. Brave or reckless, I'm going to fight. They agreed to meet later that week. Sarah would visit the facility, examine Dr. Brennan's research archive, and begin building her story. Combined with James Chin's legal action, the pressure on Meridian would become public and potentially impossible to ignore. Elena returned to the facility to find Rosa and Mia in the small laboratory Mia had claimed. Her daughter was showing Rosa her experiments, elaborate arrangements of colored liquids and beakers, mixtures of food coloring and water that Mia was documenting with the seriousness of a real scientist. "Mama," Mia's face lit up when Elena entered. "I discovered that blue and yellow make green, just like Dr. Brennan discovered how to make medicine." The innocent parallel made Elena's throat tight. This was what childhood should be: safe exploration, wonder at simple discoveries, the luxury of learning without consequences. Instead, Mia lived with needles and nausea, with the adult knowledge that her body was betraying her, with fear masked by remarkable bravery. Rosa pulled Elena aside while Mia continued her experiments. "How did it go? Is the lawyer going to help? He's taking the case. And there's a journalist who wants to investigate Meridian's practices." Elena sank into a desk chair, the weight of the day catching up with her. "I think I just declared war on a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company." Rosa's expression was complicated, pride and concern in equal measure. "You sure about this? Once you go public, you can't take it back." "I'm not sure about anything except that doing nothing guarantees Mia dies and Dr. Brennan's work gets buried forever. At least this way, there's a chance something changes." That night, after Mia was asleep, Elena descended to the archive room one more time. She stood before the safe, looking at the preserved vials of compound bar 505M that represented Dr. Brennan's life work and her daughter's possible salvation. The compound sat there, viable and waiting, separated from patients who needed them by barriers of regulation, economics, and corporate interest. Those barriers had seemed insurmountable a week ago. Now, with legal representation and journalistic attention mobilizing, the barriers looked different, still formidable but not necessarily permanent. Systems could change. Institutions could be pressured. Sometimes a single person with nothing left to lose could move mountains simply by refusing to accept that mountains couldn't be moved. Elena's phone buzzed with an email from James Chun, sent late into the night. "Emergency motion filed. Hearing scheduled for Thursday morning. Thorne's attorneys will oppose, so prepare for confrontation. Also, I've reached out to several pharmaceutical researchers about evaluating Brennan's work. Initial responses are very positive. People are interested. JC. 3 days until the hearing. 3 days until Elena would stand in front of a judge and defend her right to keep the facility, to protect Dr. Brennan's research, to fight for what should have been available to patients all along." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Elena was making breakfast when the security system chimed, multiple vehicles approaching. Through the windows, she counted 5 cars pulling into the circular drive. Not sheriffs or building inspectors this time, but something potentially more dangerous. Richard Thorne emerged from the lead vehicle, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who had attorney written all over them. Behind them came 3 more people, one with a camera, one with official-looking documents, and one Elena recognized from her internet research as the Millbrook building inspector who'd cited her for violations. Elena met them at the main entrance, blocking the doorway with her body. Mia was safely upstairs with strict instructions to stay in their quarters no matter what happened. "Ms. Morales." Thorne's smile was practiced and cold. I'm here with the building inspector to conduct a follow-up evaluation of the code violations. Given your continued occupancy despite the citation, we need to assess whether the situation requires immediate action. You don't have the right to enter this property. Elena kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. The facility is private property under my stewardship per Dr. Brennan's will. One of Thorne's attorneys stepped forward, producing documents. Actually, Ms. Morales, the probate challenge creates legal ambiguity about your status. Until the will is validated, your authority to deny. Thursday morning arrived with cold November rain. Pathetic fallacy made literal. Elena dressed in her most professional clothes. A suit from her previous life when she'd worked hospital administration, now slightly loose from stress-induced weight loss, but still presentable. Rosa stayed with Mia, who accepted her mother's departure with brave understanding that made Elena's heart ache. The courthouse in Hartford was intimidating. All marble and wood paneling and echoing corridors where lawyers moved with professional confidence Elena couldn't hope to match. James Chin met her on the steps, reviewing last-minute strategy. This is just the emergency motion hearing, not the full probate challenge. We're asking the judge to prevent any action against the property or your occupancy until Brennan's will is properly validated. He held the door as they entered. Thorne's attorneys will argue that your status as inheritor is questionable, that you're occupying the property inappropriately, and that allowing you to remain there creates risk to valuable assets. What do we argue? That Dr. Brennan's will was properly executed, that you're the named beneficiary, and that Thorne's challenge is motivated by his business interests rather than legitimate legal concerns. Will present evidence of his connection to Meridian, his aggressive acquisition attempts, and the suspicious timing of various actions against you. Chun squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. Let me do most of the talking. You're here as a show of good faith and to answer direct questions if the judge has any. The courtroom was smaller than Elena expected, more functional than dramatic. Judge Rebecca Morrison presided, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and an expression suggesting she'd heard every argument and wouldn't tolerate nonsense from either side. Thorne attended with 3 attorneys, their expensive suits and coordinated materials demonstrating resources Elena couldn't match. But Chun had brought his own backup, a paralegal with files of evidence and a quiet confidence that suggested he'd been in courtrooms like this countless times before. The hearing began with procedural matters, establishing jurisdiction, reviewing the emergency motions basis, allowing both sides to present preliminary arguments. Chun spoke first, laying out the timeline of events with damning clarity. Dr. Brennan's will was properly executed, witnessed, and filed. Elena Morales was the named beneficiary, selected specifically because of her mother's past work at the facility and her personal understanding of cancer research. The will included detailed letters of instruction explaining Dr. Brennan's motivations. Within weeks of Dr. Brennan's death, Richard Thorne, who had unsuccessfully attempted to purchase the property for years, began aggressive efforts to acquire it through Ms. Morales. When she refused to sell, Thorne filed a probate challenge claiming undue influence despite having no personal relationship with Dr. Brennan and no legitimate interest in the estate beyond his commercial desires. Simultaneously, Thorne initiated building code enforcement actions using his position on Millbrook's Town Council, attempted unauthorized entry to the property with municipal officials, and sent increasingly threatening communications to Ms. Morales. Chun presented the evidence systematically. Thorne's board membership with Meridian Therapeutics, his role in the original acquisition of Dr. Brennan's intellectual property, the timeline of his offers escalating from $200,000 to $400,000, the text messages implying connection between sale and resolution of Elena's problems. Your Honor, this isn't a legitimate probate dispute. It's corporate intimidation designed to acquire research materials that pose a threat to pharmaceutical industry interests. Chun placed photographs of the archive room's contents on the evidence table. Mr. Thorne doesn't want this property for development. He wants to ensure Dr. Brennan's research remains buried. Thorne's lead attorney, a polished woman named Vanessa Hewitt, responded with practiced dismissiveness. Mr. Chun is weaving conspiracy theories around straightforward business dealings. Mr. Thorne's interest in the property is legitimate real estate development, nothing more sinister. His offers were generous attempts to help Ms. Morales resolve her financial difficulties. She presented her own timeline, one that painted Elena as an unstable mother exploiting her sick daughter's situation, occupying a facility she couldn't properly maintain, and making wild accusations to justify refusing reasonable offers. Ms. Morales has no background in pharmaceutical research, no ability to properly secure or maintain valuable research materials, and no legal authority to occupy commercial property residentially. Hewitt's tone suggested Elena was either incompetent or malicious, possibly both. Dr. Brennan's decision to leave her this property raises serious questions about his mental state in his final months, questions that deserve thorough investigation through proper probate proceedings. Judge Morrison listened to both presentations with an expression that revealed nothing. Finally, she addressed the attorneys directly. "I've reviewed the filed motions and supporting documentation. Mr. Chun, your evidence of Mr. Thorne's business relationship with Meridian Therapeutics is concerning, particularly given the facility's research history. However, Ms. Hewitt is correct that questions about Dr. Brennan's testamentary capacity deserve proper examination." Elena's heart sank. The judge was going to rule against them, going to allow Thorne's challenge to proceed unimpeded. But Morrison continued, "What I won't tolerate is harassment of a legitimate beneficiary during probate proceedings. The pattern of escalating pressure tactics Mr. Chun has documented suggests improper motivations." She turned to Thorne's attorneys. "Your client's aggressive acquisition attempts, combined with his clear business interest in suppressing research materials, creates an appearance of impropriety that undermines the probate challenge's legitimacy." The judge shuffled papers, making notes. "Here's my ruling. The probate challenge will proceed through normal channels. Both parties will have opportunity to present evidence about Dr. Brennan's testamentary capacity and the will's validity. However, until that matter is resolved, Ms. Morales' status as named beneficiary stands. She has the right to occupy the property and secure its contents as steward of the estate." Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully she nearly swayed. Access to properly authorized officials is questionable. And Mr. Fisher here, he gestured to the building inspector, has legitimate municipal authority to inspect properties with active code violations. The building inspector looked uncomfortable being used as a weapon in this confrontation, but he stepped forward with a clipboard. "Ms. Morales, I just need to verify whether the violations from my previous citation have been addressed. It's standard procedure." Elena recognized the trap. If she let them in, they'd find reasons to escalate the violations, maybe discover the archive room and Dr. Brennan's preserved compounds. If she refused, they'd claim obstruction and use it as grounds to force entry through legal mechanisms. "I want this documented." Elena pulled out her phone, setting it to video record. "You're attempting to gain access to private property using building code enforcement as a pretext for what's actually corporate intimidation. Mr. Thorne, you sit on Meridian Therapeutics Board of Directors. This facility contains research evidence that's damaging to Meridian. Your presence here is witness intimidation." Thorne's composure slipped momentarily. "That's a serious accusation with no basis in. I have documentation of your business relationship with Meridian, your role in acquiring Dr. Brennan's intellectual property, and your aggressive efforts to acquire this facility." Elena kept her phone trained on him. "I've already provided that documentation to my attorney. This encounter is being recorded and will be submitted as evidence of your harassment." The mention of an attorney caused visible concern among Thorne's team. The lawyers exchanged glances, clearly recalculating their strategy. The building inspector took a step back, recognizing he was being used in a way that could jeopardize his professional position. "Perhaps we should reschedule this inspection," the inspector offered, trying to extract himself from the confrontation. "Once the legal status of the property is clarified." "There's nothing to clarify," one of Thorne's attorneys interrupted. "The code violations are a matter of public record and municipal authority. Ms. Morales's threats about recording and legal action don't supersede legitimate building safety concerns. A new voice cut through the tension. Actually, they do when the inspection is being conducted in bad faith as part of a coordinated harassment campaign. James Chun walked up the drive with the confident stride of someone arriving at exactly the right moment. He'd driven up from Hartford, Elena realized, probably after she'd texted him about the unexpected visitors. James Chun, representing Ms. Morales in the probate matter and related claims against Mr. Thorne and Meridian Therapeutics. He handed business cards to the attorneys. "I've filed an emergency motion to prevent any interference with this property until the will is properly validated. That hearing is Thursday. Until then, any attempt to enter the facility or harass my client will be documented as evidence of the bad faith motivations underlying your probate challenge." The power dynamic shifted visibly. Thorne's attorneys huddled briefly, then addressed Chun with professional courtesy that barely masked frustration. "The building code violations are separate from the probate matter, except they were initiated by Mr. Thorne using his position on the town council, which creates a clear connection." Chin's smile was sharp. "I'm sure the judge will be very interested in the timeline. How violations that went unenforced for 15 years suddenly became urgent within days of Mr. Thorne learning he couldn't purchase the property through voluntary sale." The building inspector seized the opportunity to retreat. "I'm going to recommend postponing this inspection until the legal matters are resolved. I don't want my department caught in the middle of a private dispute." As the inspector departed, Thorne's facade cracked further. He addressed Elena directly, ignoring his attorney's warning looks. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. Meridian Therapeutics employs thousands of people, provides life-saving medications to millions. Your misguided crusade could damage all of that based on one old man's bitter delusions about research that was never viable. If the research wasn't viable, why are you so desperate to acquire it?" Elena stepped closer to Thorne, her fear transmuting into anger. "Why offer $400,000 for a worthless property? Why challenge the will and harass me if there's nothing here that threatens Meridian?" Thorne had no answer that wouldn't confirm Elena's accusations. He retreated to his vehicle with his attorneys, leaving threats hanging unspoken in the air between them. After they departed, Chin walked the property perimeter with Elena, assessing security. "You need better protection than motion sensors and locked doors. Thorne is clearly escalating, and desperate people with resources do dangerous things." "What kind of protection?" "I can't afford private security. I know a few people, veterans who do security consulting, retired police officers who work part-time. Let me make some calls." Chin was already typing on his phone. "In the meantime, document everything. Every vehicle that approaches, every unfamiliar person who makes contact, every threatening communication. We're building a pattern of harassment that will support our case." The next 2 days passed in strange combination of routine and tension. Elena maintained Mia's treatment schedule, prepared for Thursday's hearing, and gave extensive interviews to Sarah Mitchell, the journalist. Sarah spent hours in the archive room, photographing documents and building her story about pharmaceutical development practices that prioritize profit over patients. "This is going to be huge," Sarah said Wednesday evening as she reviewed her notes. "I have enough documentation to publish an initial story this weekend. Preliminary information about Brennan's research and Meridian's acquisition of it. Then follow-up pieces as we uncover more details." "How will Meridian respond?" "Badly." Sarah's smile was grim. "They'll issue denials, threaten legal action, try to discredit the sources. But they can't suppress facts, especially when we have documentation. This story will have legs." Furthermore, Morrison continued, steel in her voice now, "I'm issuing a protective order. Mr. Thorne and any agents acting on his behalf are prohibited from contacting Ms. Morales directly, from initiating or supporting code enforcement actions against the property, and from any attempts to access the facility without proper legal authorization. Violation of this order will result in contempt charges." She looked at Elena directly for the first time. "Ms. Morales, you understand that this is a temporary measure?" The probate challenge will continue, and there's no guarantee you'll ultimately be validated as the rightful inheritor. I understand, Your Honor. Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. I just want the opportunity to protect Dr. Brennan's work and understand what he left me without being harassed in a selling before I have that chance. That's a reasonable request. Morrison signed the order with decisive strokes. Both parties will reconvene in 60 days for the preliminary probate hearing. In the meantime, respect the boundaries I've established or face consequences. Outside the courthouse, Chun was jubilant. That went better than I hoped. Morrison saw right through Thorne's tactics. The protective order gives you breathing room to work with the journalist, evaluate the research, build your case. But we haven't won. The probate challenge continues. True, but now Thorne has to prove Dr. Brennan was incompetent rather than you having to prove he wasn't. That's a much higher bar. Chun walked Elena to her car, briefcase swinging. And every day that passes with you properly maintaining the facility and conducting yourself responsibly strengthens your position as the appropriate steward of this legacy. Elena drove back to Millbrook with emotions she couldn't quite name. Victory felt premature when a larger battle remained unresolved. But she'd survived the first major confrontation, had official protection against Thorne's harassment, and had time, precious time, to understand what Dr. Brennan had left her and why. Sarah Mitchell's article published that weekend in a major online investigative journalism platform. The headline alone sent shockwaves through pharmaceutical industry circles. Buried research. How Meridian Therapeutics suppressed superior cancer treatment to fast-track profitable alternative. The article detailed Dr. Brennan's career, the development of Protocol 505M, and the intellectual property dispute that had ended his research. Sarah had interviewed former consortium members, reviewed patent filings, and obtained expert testimony from independent oncologists who evaluated the comparative data between Brennan's original compounds and Celeritin-9. The evidence was damning. Celeritin-9 was effective, but Brennan's compounds showed significantly better outcomes in preliminary trials, higher remission rates, fewer side effects, more durable responses. Meridian had known this when they modified the research for faster commercialization. They chose market speed over maximum efficacy, one quoted expert stated. It's legal, but ethically questionable. Patients deserved access to the better treatment, not the one that could be brought to market fastest. The article included Elena's story, her daughter's diagnosis, her inability to access Celeritin-9 due to insurance limitations, her accidental inheritance of the research that could have prevented Mia's suffering. Sarah had written it carefully, focusing on systemic issues rather than personal tragedy, but the human element was impossible to ignore. Meridian's response came within hours, a formal statement denying any misconduct, asserting that all their research practices met regulatory standards, and threatening legal action against the publication for reckless allegations based on incomplete information. But the internet doesn't care about corporate denials. The story went viral, shared across social media by patient advocacy groups, picked up by other journalists, discussed on medical ethics forums. Within 48 hours, #Brennan Research was trending, and Meridian stock price had dropped 8%. Elena watched this unfold from the facility with growing astonishment. She'd expected the article to make some impact, but not this. Not a groundswell of public attention and anger about pharmaceutical development practices. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests, messages of support from strangers, and increasingly frantic calls from Meridian's public relations team that she declined to answer on Chen's advice. Mia understood something important was happening without grasping the details. Are people mad at the medicine company, Mama? Yes, baby. They're mad that the company didn't make the best medicine they could have made. Elena struggled to explain in 7-year-old terms. Remember how Dr. Brennan's research was about helping sick kids like you? The company took his research but changed it to make it easier to sell, even though the original version was better. That's not fair to the sick kids. No, it's not. Is that why you're fighting? To make them do the fair thing. Elena pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the fragility of her small body. That's exactly why I'm fighting. The following week brought developments Elena hadn't anticipated. 3 different pharmaceutical research institutions contacted her expressing interest in Dr. Brennan's work. Not companies looking to commercialize it, but academic centers and nonprofit drug development foundations intrigued by the possibility of completing the research properly. Dr. Harrington from the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston called personally. Dr. Brennan's protocol 505M represents exactly the kind of patient-focused drug development that institutional research should pursue. If you're willing to grant us access to the research materials and preserve compounds, we'd like to propose a collaborative effort to complete clinical trials. Elena's hand shook as she took notes. What would that involve? Full evaluation of the compound's stability and safety, then properly structured clinical trials to establish efficacy. It would take years and significant funding, but Dana-Farber has resources for exactly this kind of research. Dr. Harrington paused. I should mention, completing this work would likely generate competitive pressure on Meridian Celeritinine. They won't be pleased. They're already not pleased. At this point, I'm less concerned about Meridian's feelings than about getting better treatments to patients who need them. Parallel to these hopeful developments, Thorne's legal team escalated their probate challenge. They deposed Elena for 6 grueling hours, asking invasive questions about her financial situation, her relationship with Dr. Brennan, non-existent, her qualifications to manage a research facility, none, her motivations for refusing sale offers, desperate and possibly delusional, their questions implied. Chun coached her through it. Answer honestly, don't speculate, stay calm no matter how aggressive they get. Elena survived the deposition, but emerged exhausted and shaken, questioning whether she had the strength to see this fight through. That night, Rosa called from Philadelphia with unexpected news. Elena, you're not going to believe this. Remember how I told my church group about what you're doing? Fighting for better cancer treatments. Yes. Elena braced for whatever was coming. They took up a collection. Not just our church, but they reached out to other congregations, community groups, the hospital where you used to work. People who know you. People who've watched you fight for Mia. Rosa's voice cracked with emotion. Elena, they raised $47,000. For Mia's treatment, for legal fees, for whatever you need. Elena couldn't speak. $47,000 from people who barely knew her, who had their own struggles and expenses, who chose to support a fight that wasn't directly theirs. The generosity was overwhelming. There's more, Rosa continued. An anonymous donor matched the total. Someone who read the article and wanted to help. So that's $94,000, Elena. Enough to get Mia into the Celeritin 9 trial in Boston if they'll take her. Enough to keep fighting without drowning. The money arrived in an account Chun set up for exactly this purpose. Donations to support Elena's stewardship of Dr. Brennan's legacy and Mia's medical care. The anonymous matching donor remained unknown despite Elena's efforts to identify them, but their generosity made the impossible suddenly feasible. Dr. Patterson confirmed that with funding available, she could facilitate Mia's enrollment in the Boston trial. It would mean frequent trips to Massachusetts, ongoing monitoring, no guarantee of success, but a real chance of the treatment that might save her life. 6 weeks after inheriting the facility, Elena stood in the archive room with representatives from Dana-Farber, James Chun, Sarah Mitchell, and Dr. Patterson. They'd gathered to formally transfer Dr. Brennan's research materials to the Institute for completion of clinical trials, a moment that felt simultaneously monumental and insufficient. Dr. Brennan spent 40 years developing these compounds, Elena said, her hand resting on the safe that held the preserved vials. He fought pharmaceutical companies that wanted to bury his work because it wasn't commercially convenient. He left everything to me not because I was qualified, but because he trusted I'd understand what was at stake and would fight to make sure it mattered. She opened the safe, revealing the carefully organized archive. I'm transferring these materials to Dana-Farber with one condition: that this research is completed with patients as the priority, not profit. That the goal is the best possible treatment, not the fastest route to market. Dr. Harrington accepted the archive with visible reverence. That's exactly how we operate. This will be done right, Elena. It will take time, but we'll honor Dr. Brennan's vision. As the research materials were carefully packed for transport to Boston, Sarah pulled Elena aside. I'm working on a follow-up article about how institutional research can pick up where commercial pharmaceutical development fails. Your story, this facility, Dr. Brennan's legacy, it's becoming a case study in how things could work differently. I didn't set out to become a case study. I just wanted to save my daughter. The best advocacy is personal. Sarah squeezed Elena's hand. You're changing systems because you refuse to accept that the system was unchangeable. That's powerful. The probate hearing 2 months later felt anticlimactic compared to everything that had preceded it. Thorne's attorneys presented their case, questioning Dr. Brennan's mental state, arguing that leaving the facility to someone he'd met once was irrational, suggesting undue influence from parties unknown. Chun countered with Dr. Brennan's medical records showing full cognitive function, with his detailed letters of instruction explaining his reasoning, and with character witnesses who testified to his careful consideration of who should continue his work. But the deciding factor was public pressure. The viral article, the patient advocacy groups now championing Dr. Brennan's research, the academic institutions validating his work's significance. All of it created context that made Thorne's challenge look increasingly self-serving. Judge Morrison ruled decisively. Dr. Brennan's will is validated. Ms. Morales is the legitimate beneficiary and steward of his estate. The probate challenge is dismissed with prejudice. She looked at Thorne, who sat stone-faced in the gallery. I'll note for the record that this challenge appeared motivated more by business interests than legitimate legal concerns. The court does not appreciate being used to advance commercial agendas. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Elena had become a minor celebrity in pharmaceutical reform circles, her story emblematic of larger, systemic issues. She made a brief statement Chun had helped her prepare. This was never about me or inheriting a valuable property. It was about honoring Dr. Brennan's life work and ensuring that research focused on patients reaches patients. I'm grateful the court recognized that, and I'm committed to maintaining the facility as a resource for continued research and education. Mia's treatment in Boston showed promising early results. The Celeritin 9 trial protocol was grueling, but her response exceeded Dr. Patterson's cautious predictions. 3 months into the trial, scans showed significant reduction in cancer markers. 6 months in, Mia achieved measurable remission. Elena split her time between the facility in Connecticut and Boston treatment visits, establishing a routine that felt almost sustainable. The research facility itself evolved, no longer abandoned, but actively used. Dana-Farber researchers came regularly to study Dr. Brennan's archives and conduct experiments in the laboratories. A small nonprofit was established to maintain the property as an educational center focused on patient-centered pharmaceutical research. Richard Thorne faded from Elena's life after the probate defeat, his attention apparently redirected to other business ventures. Meridian Therapeutics faced ongoing scrutiny. Sarah's articles had spawned congressional inquiries into pharmaceutical development practices and patient access to optimal treatments. The company's reputation took hits it would take years to recover from, if recovery was even possible. A year after Elena had received the call about Dr. Brennan's estate, she stood in the facility's main laboratory with Mia, watching her daughter examine slides under a microscope with the fascination of a child who'd been given back her future. Mia's hair was growing back, dark curls that would eventually match what she'd lost. Her energy had returned, her color improved, her laugh genuine rather than brave. "Mama, can I be a scientist when I grow up? Like Dr. Brennan?" Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the casual way Mia referenced "when I grow up," a future that had seemed impossible just months ago. "You can be anything you want, Mia Moore. Scientist, artist, explorer. Whatever makes you happy. I want to make medicines that help sick kids, so other kids don't have to be scared like I was." Dr. Patterson, who'd stopped by for one of her regular research consultations, overhead and knelt beside Mia. "Then you should know, Dana-Farber is naming their new pediatric oncology research program after Dr. Brennan. the Elena Morales Initiative for Patient-Centered Cancer Research. Morales? Elena stared at her. But I didn't do the research. You fought to make sure it mattered. Dr. Patterson's smile was warm. Dr. Brennan provided the science, but you provided the heart and the courage to ensure it reached patients. That deserves recognition. That evening, Elena sat in Dr. Brennan's office. Her office now, though she still thought of it as his. The photograph of her mother and Dr. Brennan hung on the wall beside other pictures documenting the facility's history. She'd added recent photos. Mia's first day back at school after achieving remission, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the educational center, researchers working in laboratories that had sat dark for 15 years. A letter she'd found among Dr. Brennan's personal effects sat on the desk, one she returned to frequently when doubt crept in. Elena, if you're reading this, you've decided to fight rather than sell. That decision will bring hardship and opposition from powerful interests. You'll question whether you made the right choice. You'll feel overwhelmed by responsibilities you never sought. But remember this, every system that seems immovable was built by people, which means people can change it. Pharmaceutical development prioritizes profit because that's what we've allowed it to prioritize. But it doesn't have to be that way. Patient needs can come first if enough people refuse to accept that they should come second. I spent 40 years trying to change the system from within. I failed. Perhaps you'll succeed by refusing to accept the system's premise entirely. Your mother did that. She refused to accept that excellent care was only for wealthy patients, that compassion was unprofessional, that nurses should defer to doctors without question. She changed every environment she entered simply by insisting that better was possible. You have her strength and stubbornness. Use it well. Marcus. Elena touched the letter gently, feeling connection across time to both her mother and the researcher who'd believed she'd understand what he was leaving her. She had understood, eventually. Not immediately, not without struggle, but she'd grown into comprehension of the gift and burden Dr. Brennan had entrusted to her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. "How's our girl?" Elena sent back a photo of Mia at the microscope, engaged and healthy and vibrant. Rosa's response was immediate. "Thank God. And thank you for not giving up." But Elena hadn't been the one who refused to give up. Not really. Dr. Brennan had refused to let his life's work disappear into pharmaceutical company archives. Mia had refused to surrender to illness without fighting. Rosa and countless others had refused to accept that nothing could be done to help. Elena had just been the one who happened to be standing at the intersection when all that refusal collided with opportunity. She'd said yes when she could have said no, had fought when she could have sold out, had trusted that the impossible might become possible if enough people worked together toward the same impossible goal. The facility that had seemed like burden and mystery a year ago now felt like purpose. Not hers alone, but shared, a legacy of patient-focused research that would outlive all of them, helping children and families face cancer without being limited by what pharmaceutical companies found profitable to develop. Mia appeared in the doorway, ready for bed, her stuffed animals tucked under her arm. "Can I sleep here tonight?" "In our castle." Their castle. The science castle that had become home, headquarters, and hope. Elena scooped her daughter up, feeling the solid weight of her. Not fragile anymore, but sturdy and growing and full of future. "Of course, Mia Moore. This is exactly where we belong." Outside, November darkness had fallen over the Connecticut woods, but lights glowed in the facility's windows. Researchers worked late in laboratories, pursuing answers that might save lives rather than maximize profits. Students from nearby universities came to learn about patient-centered drug development. Journalists continued documenting the story of how one abandoned facility had become a symbol of what pharmaceutical research could be when human need outweighed corporate interest. And in Dr. Brennan's office, Elena held her daughter close and watched the lights of their improbable victory shine against the darkness, proving that sometimes, when you have nothing left to lose, you discover you had everything necessary to win all along. The fight wasn't over. Systemic change never is. But tonight, in this moment, there was peace. Mia was healthy. The research was continuing. The legacy was secure. Sometimes that had to be enough. And sometimes, miraculously, it was more than enough. It was everything.